On the first day after being reincarnated as the Empire's queen, the Mad Emperor personally handed her a cup of poison wine. It would leave her with only half a year to live. To survive, she had to escape this demon tonight. Deep inside the imperial palace late at night, Queen Kinna was alone in her room. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke the stillness of the night. Kinna turned around warily and questioned Salius, who had come to visit so late. "What exactly are you doing here at this hour?" Salius did not answer. He only looked at her coldly. In the eyes of this husband in name only, she was nothing more than an exquisite plaything. But Kinna did not care, because she had already decided that she would soon leave this man completely. Salius took out a pink diamond ring and forcibly slipped it onto Kinna's finger, claiming it was a reward for her. On the surface, Kinna smiled and apologized, but in her heart, she was calculating the ring's value. If she sold this thing, it would be enough for her to live comfortably for the rest of her life. She secretly counted down to her escape. There were only 3 months left before the planned departure. And as Salius looked at the wife before him, he was also sneering inwardly. In his eyes, Kinna had at most half a year left to live. This tyrant thought victory was already in his grasp, but he had no idea that Kinna had long since discovered the poison in the wine. What was more, that poison had no effect on her at all. Salius stared at the woman before him, a complicated emotion flashing through his eyes. Before Kinna could react, he suddenly pulled her forcefully into his arms. This sudden intimate gesture made the air in the room freeze instantly. Salius lowered his head slightly and murmured something softly by her ear, his voice so quiet that it was impossible to hear clearly. Who could have imagined that Kinna was hiding an enormous secret? She was actually a reincarnator who had entered a novel she had read in her previous life. According to the original plot, Salius was a complete and utter madman. At tonight's banquet, he would personally poison her, leaving Kinna with only half a year to live. The reason this tyrant did not kill her outright was simply so he could enjoy the struggling, despairing expression she would make as death drew near. Kinna once asked him why he did not just do it directly. Salius had sneered and replied, "If I let you die right away, what fun would be left in this game?" In the original novel, Salius was a tyrant who ruled through terror. He had been cold and ruthless since childhood. At the age of 9, he brutally killed his own brother. At 13, he forced his way onto the throne and seized power. Ordinary slaughter could no longer satisfy his appetite, so he began searching for more thrilling prey. He utterly despised pure women and even tried to kill Flora several times. But evildoers eventually meet their retribution. At the end of the story, he would be thoroughly defeated by the adventurer hero Lu Shan and meet an incomparably miserable end. The wife tortured to death by poison in the original work was clearly the current Kinna herself. A call from the maid Bestie pulled Kinna back from her thoughts. She quickly hid the panic on her face. Bestie thought her mistress was nervous about the banquet, so Kinna could only go along with her assumption and brush it off. In Bestie's eyes, this was a good thing. The Emperor had finally come around, and she even hoped the two of them could spend a wonderful night together. But Kinna knew very well that according to the original plot, the poisoned wine Salius would hand her tonight would be the beginning of her death. That cup of poison wine was unavoidable. What on earth should she do? Salius was the supreme ruler of the Empire. When he personally handed her poison wine, Kinna had absolutely no room to refuse. She forced herself to calm down. She had read that novel countless times. There had to be a clue hidden inside that could break the deadlock. In her previous life, she had been a director managing dozens of subordinates. What kind of storms had she not weathered? This time, she would definitely find a way to survive too. Watching Kinna scratch her head anxiously at the side, Bestie was completely dumbfounded, thinking her mistress was under too much pressure. At this critical moment, a flash of inspiration suddenly struck Kinna's mind. She finally thought of the key clue. As long as she could find the genius pharmacist Gamma in time and have him prepare an antidote, her little life could be saved. In the later part of the original novel, Lu Shan was once poisoned with a deadly toxin. Flora went to beg Gamma to save him, but because she was a commoner, she was mercilessly rejected. In despair, Flora awakened as a saint and only then used sacred power to preserve Lu Shan's life. Now that she knew about Gamma, she had to act immediately. Kinna turned and ordered Bestie to prepare a maid's outfit. She was going to leave the city herself to find a pharmacist. Hearing such an absurd order, Bestie froze on the spot. How could the noble Her Majesty the Queen suddenly want to disguise herself as a maid and leave the city? Bestie quickly reminded her that leaving the city required the emperor's permission first. Kinna flatly refused and said there was no need to go to Salius's chambers. She usually lived in seclusion inside the palace, so no one outside recognized her face at all. As long as she changed into a maid's uniform, she could slip out of the palace without anyone noticing. Seeing that Bestie was still hesitating, Kinna directly ordered her to do as she said. Still, at the mention of Salius, Kinna felt somewhat afraid of that man. Just thinking of those cold, dangerous red eyes sent a chill down her spine. In Salius's eyes, every living thing in the world, including his wife in name only, Kinna, was nothing more than a toy for his amusement. There was not the slightest human emotion in those icy eyes. At first, this empire had only been a small nation on the continent. But ever since Salius ascended the throne at 13, he began madly invading neighboring countries. Through endless bloody wars, he forcibly turned the nation into the continent's #1 empire. During that time, only one small country called Alberg barely escaped disaster because it lacked resources and had a tiny territory. Everyone thought he simply looked down on that place, but in the end, he suddenly launched an attack anyway. And the reason was merely that he wanted to test a newly developed weapon. To save itself, Alberg offered Kinna as tribute to the Tyrant Salius. After all, she could not use magic like her younger sister. To her family, her only value was to serve as a sacrifice. But after Salius brought her back to the palace, he never decided how to deal with her. Until one day, this madman suddenly came up with a vicious idea. He would use a slow-acting poison to torment Kinna to death, treating it as entertainment in his boring life. He was simply a complete pervert. Kinna had no intention of sitting and waiting for death, becoming a puppet in his hands. Since she had finally been given a second life, no matter what, she had to escape from this demon's side. On their wedding night, the emperor forced her to drink a deadly poison that would kill her in half a year, yet she drained it on the spot, even smiling as she did. The mad emperor was completely enraged by this abnormal reaction. He immediately drew his sword and placed it against her neck. To escape poverty, she had been forced to study desperately since childhood. After great difficulty, she relied on scholarships and was barely admitted to a top university. But after graduation, because she was too terrified of returning to her former poverty, she did not dare slack off for even a day. She worked like a machine, frantically and relentlessly, until her body gave out first. She died suddenly in the office. At that time, her heart was filled with regret. If she could start over, she would definitely live for herself. As the memories of her previous life became clearer and clearer, her desire to survive was completely awakened. After changing into plain clothes, she brought Bestie and ran wildly through the streets. Bestie nearly failed to keep up from behind and wondered in confusion. This was clearly her mistress's first time in the capital, so how was she so familiar with the roads? Kinna could only casually make up an excuse, saying she had been too bored in her room and had long since memorized the map thoroughly. As they spoke, the two stopped in front of a building. Bestie looked up and saw that it was nothing more than an ordinary pharmacy. Just then, the stone door suddenly opened from the inside. A man walked out with a cold expression and asked irritably what they wanted. Who could have imagined that this unfriendly-looking man was the genius pharmacist Gamma, the person who could save her life? In the original novel, Gamma was famously snobbish. Although that personality was rather annoying, for the current Kinna, it was good news. Kinna simply cut straight to the point, directly revealed her identity as the queen, and demanded that he prepare an antidote. But Gamma sneered. He was a pharmacist personally recognized by the emperor. How could he easily obey someone else's orders? Clearly, words alone would not work. Kinna directly drew her accessory dagger. Gamma stared at the short sword on the table, utterly stunned, because the emblem on the sword was the Emperor's exclusive mark. He could not understand how the woman before him possessed such a thing. Facing Gamma's questioning, Kinna had no intention of hiding it, and said directly, "This is the family dagger I received when I entered the palace. Although Salius did not personally give it to me, its origin is by no means insignificant. At the time, The chancellor who delivered the sword had even specially instructed her that if she truly could not endure the emperor's torment, she should use that sword to end things herself. In other words, this was the dignified death the imperial family had prepared for her. Hearing this, everything clicked in Gamma's mind. The person before him was none other than the rumored Her Majesty the Queen. Gamma apologized repeatedly. "Please forgive my rudeness. Please, have a seat over here." Kinna said, "I have received a secret commission from above. Because this matter is extremely important, I personally made this trip." Gamma asked what the specific commission was. Kinna replied, "The higher-ups hope you will immediately prepare the antidote to the 6-month death poison." Gamma was somewhat puzzled. That poison had only been delivered a few days earlier. But on second thought, it was common for that temperamental emperor to change his mind. Kinna took out a treasure. "As long as you can prepare the antidote, this will be yours." Kinna warned him coldly, "If you dare refuse, you know the consequences. That emperor's temper is not something you can afford to provoke." As soon as Gamma heard this and looked at the treasure on the table, he hurriedly agreed and said he would prepare it at once. 3 hours passed, and Gamma really did produce the potion. As long as she drank it before the meal, it could completely neutralize the 6-month death poison. Looking at the bottle of potion, Kinna could not help muttering inwardly, "Wasn't this a little too fast?" Kinna handed over the necklace. "Fine, I'll trust you this time. This is your payment." Gamma was overjoyed. He apologized to Kinna repeatedly and even said that if she needed anything in the future, she could come to him at any time. Seeing Gamma's money-grubbing appearance, Kinna actually breathed a sigh of relief. People like him were easy to deal with. He might come in handy again in the future. Although this necklace was a keepsake left by her mother, at the other end of the long table, Celia smiled and said, "This cup of wine was specially prepared for you. Drink it all in one go." This moment had finally come. Although her heart was still somewhat uneasy, there was no turning back now. Kinna tilted her head back and drained the wine in the cup. Gamma was a genius pharmacist. There would absolutely be no problem this time. Watching Kinna drink the wine, the smile at the corners of Celius's mouth deepened. "My dear wife, you have only half a year left to live. That cup of wine just now contained a deadly poison that will end your life in 6 months. Watching you tremble in fear before you die will surely be very interesting." These lines were exactly the same as what was written in the novel. But Celius had no idea that the woman before him had long since changed souls. She would not simply wait for death like the original. Kinna merely asked calmly, "Is that so?" This reaction left Celius completely at a loss. The man frowned and asked, "Did you not understand what I said? You only have half a year left to live. Are you not afraid at all?" Kinna answered calmly, "I am not afraid. I have simply chosen to accept my fate." Hearing this answer, Celius froze completely. He muttered, "Accept your fate?" To be honest, Kinna wanted nothing more than to run away immediately. But reality did not allow it. The entire capital was heavily guarded, and identities were strictly checked when entering or leaving. As long as she could leave the palace smoothly, she could fake her death and escape, then completely conceal her identity. In her previous life, she had worked herself to death. In this life, she only wanted to live freely, and also a sufficiently strong one. Looking at the utterly calm Kinna, Celius completely lost patience. The man mocked her coldly. "Can you not even entertain me? What a useless waste." After speaking, Celius directly stood up and prepared to leave. But this madman clearly had no intention of letting the matter end there. With a whoosh, a bloody cut appeared directly on Kinna's face. Celius said coldly, "I might as well kill you now." Wait, this was not how it was supposed to go. She had finally gotten a second chance at life. She absolutely could not die so pathetically. She had to find a way to live. Kinna forced herself to steady her mind, took a deep breath, and shouted, "Your Majesty, please don't kill me yet. I swear that within these 6 months, I will definitely make myself useful to you." Celius sneered. "What help could a useless woman like you possibly be?" Kinna directly threw out her final bargaining chip. "I will fulfill your Majesty's wish." Celius stopped. "My wish?" Now, this was interesting. What exactly would this mad emperor's wish be? Celius approached Kinna and questioned her coldly. "And what do you think that is?" Kinna took a deep breath and gave the answer directly. "The peace and expansion of this empire." In truth, she was not confident at all. After all, the original novel never mentioned what Salius wanted. But since he had built an empire from nothing, what he cared about most had to be this. It was just like how she had worked desperately in her previous life. At their core, both were about development and profit. Salius sneered and questioned her. You, a coward who hides in a room all day. What makes you think you can help? Kinna answered calmly. I have not wasted my time in that room, Your Majesty. I have spent every day reading and studying. I have long since understood everything about this country. On this point, Kinna truly was not lying. Back when she was in the kingdom of Alberg, she had especially loved reading. Even before awakening the memories of her previous life, she had always had a book in hand. In truth, she had had no choice, because Salius could strike at any moment. To escape the fear that she might die at any time, she could only bury herself in books. In this cold palace, apart from reading, she had no amusement at all. Worse still, in that so-called home, what awaited and surrounded her was only endless torment and danger. The painful memories of the original owner's past suffering surged up all at once. That despair nearly swallowed her whole. With a clang, the long sword was thrown coldly onto the ground. Salius looked down at her and warned, Remember what you said today. If you are of no use to me, I will not wait until 6 months later. I will kill you right away. After this madman finished his threat, he slammed the door and left. Thank goodness. At least she had survived the immediate death crisis before her. Judging from the situation, her date of death could be moved forward to any time within those 6 months. But there was no retreat now. The most urgent matter was to find clues from Salius's past that could preserve her life. The original novel had indeed mentioned some intelligence useful to him, but the problem was that words alone were not enough. She had to obtain solid evidence. If she failed, she truly would lose her life. After hearing Kinna's plan, Bestie was scared stiff. His Majesty really poisoned you? Kinna was very calm and said that she had to obtain the antidote, then find a chance to fake her death and escape. Bestie hurriedly asked, Your Highness, how do you feel? Could it be that the antidote didn't work at all? Kinna quickly comforted Bestie and said that she currently felt no discomfort, although whether the antidote truly worked would only be known after 6 months. For now, she could only choose to trust Gamma. Looking at the loyal Bestie, Kinna felt much more at ease. Back when she was an ignored fringe princess in her motherland and suffered neglect, only Bestie had always stayed by her side and cared for her without leaving. This affection was truly rare. Kinna smiled and apologized to her, but before the two could say much more, heavy footsteps suddenly came from outside the door. Raffle was the man who had placed that short sword engraved with the flying dragon emblem into Kinna's hand and advised her to end her life if she could not endure it. But Raffle's identity was not simple. He had once been a knight. When Salius was imprisoned in the dungeon as a child, Raffle had been the caretaker responsible for looking after him. What did that mean? Raffle definitely knew the secrets of Salius's past. Raffle had not only been Salius's only ally back then. After Salius ascended the throne, he had directly taken the position of chancellor. It could be said that without Raffle, there would absolutely be no emperor today. He was also the only person Salius truly trusted. But who could have imagined that this seemingly loyal ally would ultimately betray Salius? After Salius's death, he usurped the throne and became emperor himself. After becoming emperor, to satisfy his own greed, he implemented an even more brutal rule than Salius. In the end, he thoroughly enraged Lu Shan and was killed directly by him. Kinna recalled the novel's setting. Raffle had treated the young Salius well back then, not out of sincerity at all, but to lay the groundwork for usurping the throne in the future. If she could find ironclad proof of Raffle's treason, Salius should begin to trust her. This was an excellent opportunity to preserve her life. Raffle smiled faintly and took the initiative to bow and greet Kinna. Kinna also responded politely, saying it had been a long time, and deliberately brought up that short sword, wanting to thank him in person for his kindness. Raffle answered with an indifferent expression. His Majesty always tends to go too far. I simply felt that short sword would come in handy sooner or later. This man was definitely insane. He had not sent the short sword to help her at all. He was eager for her to die sooner. After all, in name, she was still Salius's wife. If Raffle wanted to become emperor himself, he would absolutely not leave behind anyone close to Salius, including her, the queen in name. Raffle asked, Where have you been? Kinna answered, His Majesty invited me to have dinner with him. Raffle smiled. So it was today. Then he asked again, did that short sword end up proving useful? This old fox was clearly testing whether she had drunk the poison and was now living in agony. Kinna smiled and answered no. It was a very wonderful night. Raffle acknowledged it and said nothing more. That is good. Then I will take my leave. Although this old fox was polite on the surface, he had surely begun to grow suspicious. The road ahead would probably be even harder. Kinna could not help complaining inwardly. Why was everyone in this story a lunatic? And why had Raffle appeared in the East Palace? Wait, thinking carefully, this matter really was suspicious. Raffle had not brought even a single attendant with him. One had to know that the East Palace was Salius's private living quarters, while the place for handling government affairs was clearly the Central Palace. As Chancellor, Raffle had come alone to the East Palace at this particular time. What exactly did he want to do? Bestie noticed something strange about Kinna and asked what was wrong. Kinna voiced the doubts in her heart. For Raffle, a Chancellor, to deliberately come to the East Palace was indeed unreasonable. After hearing Kinna's question, Bestie casually mentioned maybe he went to the Treasury. After all, because of the tight security, the Treasury was the only department located in the East Palace. Hearing the word Treasury, Kinna's mind lit up. She suddenly remembered a plot point from the original novel she had read in her previous life, one she had never been able to understand at the time. Raffle was merely from a minor count's family. Even if he became Chancellor, how could he so smoothly usurp the throne and become Emperor after Salius's death? Now it seemed the answer was very likely hidden in the Treasury. There were clearly so many high-ranking nobles closer to the throne than Raffle. How exactly had he managed to bypass all of them and successfully usurp power? To uncover this secret, Kinna directly called out to Bestie. I want to go to the Treasury. Can you take me there? The monster imprisoned in the dungeon had actually killed his own brother and father and taken the throne in his place. And the Queen, unaware of everything, brought deadly evidence into his bedroom late at night to save her life, only to be cornered against the wall by the shirtless Emperor. In the Lonzak royal family, an ancient legend had always been passed down. One of the twins would become a wicked danger to the kingdom. A pair of red-eyed twins was born into the royal family. But because of that ancient prophecy, the king decided that the younger brother, who had not cried at birth, was the calamity. He directly erased all traces of the child's existence. As for the older brother, he became the empire's sole heir. He was Salius, who grew up under his parents' love from childhood. As for the younger brother, who was treated as a monster, he did not even have a name. He was locked away in a dark dungeon like garbage. But heaven never seals off all paths. The king sent a knight to guard him in the dungeon, and that knight not only taught him to read and write, but also passed on all his swordsmanship. The younger brother, who had been imprisoned in the dungeon back then, escaped at the age of 9. He not only personally eliminated his older brother and parents, but also took Salius's name and identity, disguising everything as the work of assassins. In that lightless dungeon, all the guards treated him like livestock. Only Raffle was the exception. Not only did he secretly bring him food, he always respectfully called him Your Highness. Raffle praised him through the iron bars. Your Highness, you are simply a genius in both reading and swordsmanship. Faced with Raffle's flattery, the young Salius said nothing. Although Salius outwardly ignored Raffle's words, in truth, deep in his heart, Raffle was the only person who stood on his side. The current Salius stood alone before the window, his expression frighteningly dark. He gave a cold snort, clearly in an extremely foul mood. Kinna came to the Treasury Hall, ready to try her luck there. Seeing the Queen, who usually lived in seclusion, suddenly appear, the two staff members beside her immediately began whispering. One asked, "Who is that?" The other replied, "The Queen. I heard she was sent here after her country was defeated." The first person was puzzled. She's kept herself shut in her room for 7 months. Why did she suddenly come out today? She never once showed her face at any of the ceremonies before. Kinna paid no attention to these idle remarks. She walked straight forward and asked directly, "May I look at the account books?" Faced with Kinna's sudden visit, Finance Minister Wodies asked with some confusion, "Forgive me, but may I ask who you are?" Kinna answered calmly, "I am Kinna Seals Lonzak." Hearing this name, Wodies was clearly somewhat surprised, but he quickly reacted and said, "I am terribly sorry. I was rude. I am Finance Minister Wodies." Although he apologized, Wodies remained steadily seated in his chair, without even the slightest intention of standing up to bow. His attitude was already very clear. In this palace, no one took her, the queen, seriously at all. Wodies asked warily, "Why do you wish to see the account books?" Kinna replied calmly, "I want to understand the empire's financial situation." Hearing this, Wodies froze for a moment. The two staff members nearby even laughed out loud on the spot, mocking that a decorative queen like her could not possibly understand any account books. Their attitude was already obvious. In their eyes, Kinna was merely a queen in name and had no right to interfere in government affairs. Kinna knew very well that unlike ordinary people outside, these people had long since seen through the fact that she was only a queen in name, in reality, Salius's toy. Although it was a bit late for her to realize it now, she truly had no status at all inside this palace. But had these people misunderstood one thing? Even if she was merely a toy, as long as Salius had not deposed her, she remained the only queen of this empire. Kinna asked coldly, "Is there something you do not want me to see?" This was a lesson she had learned through blood in her previous life. She absolutely could not let subordinates climb over her head. Even if she lacked confidence inside, as the one in charge, she had to straighten her back and hold firm to the end. That was how a person in power should behave. Wodies had nothing more to say and could only answer awkwardly, "You are overthinking it." Then he finally stood up obediently. Wodies led the way, bringing Kinna to the treasury door. As the door was slowly pushed open, the sight inside gave Kinna confidence. Looking at the mountain-like stacks of account books before her, the quantity was truly enormous. As expected, Raffles' secret was definitely hidden inside. Although the workload was shockingly large, her life was now hanging by a thread. No matter the cost, she had to dig out that fatal evidence. After searching through pile after pile of account books for half a day, Kinna finally found a breakthrough. The ledger recorded a massive expenditure under the name of renovation funds for the Imperial Capital's orphanage. But no matter how she looked at this sum of money, something was wrong. When she went to Gamma's home earlier, she had happened to pass by that orphanage. She still remembered clearly how dilapidated that orphanage had been at the time. If this huge sum of money had truly been spent, how could that place still be such a mess? Following this account downward, the name of the person in charge of the renovation project was written clearly, Raffle. Now the truth was clear. Raffle was definitely lining his own pockets. Was this missing massive sum the starting capital for his rebellion? From that day on, Kinna brought her maid and soaked herself in the treasury, reading through those old account books day and night. Once she started investigating, things only got worse. She uncovered several more problematic massive expenditures. And the final destination of all this money pointed to the same person, Raffle. That old fox had taken so much money. Most likely, he had used it to bribe powerful nobles. The empire's finances were already tight, and when all these bad accounts were added together, the amount was simply terrifying. As long as she handed these account books to Salius, he would definitely investigate to the end. Kinna directly picked up the account books and said to Wodies beside her, "I'll borrow these account books for now. I'll return them soon." Although Wodies looked troubled, facing the queen's command, he did not dare stop her at all. As long as she could prove that Raffle had embezzled funds from the national treasury to win over powerful nobles, Salius would absolutely not sit by and ignore it. He would definitely notice this long-planned coup. This was the only trump card that could preserve her life. As long as she presented the evidence, Raffle's end would arrive. In the blink of an eye, a week passed. Kinna went directly to the door of Salius's bedroom. This week had truly exhausted her. To present the evidence, she had submitted countless applications, but all of them were mercilessly blocked and returned. Since the proper channels would not work, she could only choose the most direct method: wait here. Although she did not know where this mad emperor was during the day, at night, he had to return to his bedroom to sleep. After waiting for so long, Salius finally appeared. But before Kinna could step forward to speak, the guard beside him drew his sword with a swish and pointed it straight at her. "Stop! Who are you?" Salius simply watched coldly without even lifting an eyelid. This mad emperor could be so cold-blooded even when seeing his own wife threatened with a blade. Although she had long known this madman had a terrible attitude, seeing the disgusted expression on his face still made anger rise in Kinna's heart. Salius stared at her coldly. Kinna took a deep breath and directly announced her identity. Hearing this name, the guards beside him were all stunned. Kinna looked at Salius and spoke calmly. "I have come to report an important matter to your majesty." As the door closed behind her, Kinna truly felt like a lamb entering a tiger's den. Thinking carefully, this was her first time entering Salius's bedroom. But that was not surprising. After all, even on their wedding night, that madman had never given her a proper look. But before she could think too much, Salius actually began taking off his clothes right in front of her. This left Kinna completely dumbfounded. In all her life, she had never seen such a scene. Even worse, Salius, bare-chested, began approaching her directly. Kinna panicked completely and hurriedly asked why he was taking off his clothes. Salius sneered and asked in return, "Why? Did you not come here in the middle of the night to beg me to sleep with you? You came here in the middle of the night just to beg me to favor you, didn't you?" The cold-blooded emperor grabbed the queen by the throat. This was not flirtation at all, but a deadly threat. To survive, she could only throw out her final trump card. Before Kinna could react, Salius pulled her over. "Or did I guess wrong? You actually don't want this at all." This time, Kinna completely lost her composure and stammered, "That's not it." But Salius had no intention of letting her go. The man continued to close in and question coldly, "Or did you come here in the middle of the night because you were eager before the 6-month deadline arrives to offer up your life?" The sharp pain around her neck made Kinna fully sober. That was right. This was Salius's true nature. How could a cold-blooded monster like him possibly have any tenderness between man and woman? In his eyes, everyone in the world existed only to obey him. To this madman, she was nothing more than a toy he could crush at any moment. To survive, she forced herself to calm down. "Your Majesty, I promised you before that I would make myself useful." Then she handed over the thick stack of account books. "This is the report I compiled on abnormal treasury funds." This time, even Salius was somewhat surprised. "So you mean Raffle is embezzling money from the treasury?" Although the evidence had already been handed over, Kinna had no confidence at all. After all, in Salius's eyes, she, the queen who had suddenly changed sides, might be even more suspicious than Raffle. But Kinna knew very well that Raffle's rebellion was an ironclad fact. This information was absolutely priceless to Salius. Kinna forced herself to explain that every account written there had been copied by her own hand from the treasury ledgers. But Salius did not buy it at all. "Do you think I would believe the words of a useless woman?" Since he did not believe her, Kinna could only provide more direct evidence. "If your Majesty does not believe me, you can personally go to the imperial capital's orphanage and look. In name, that place receives huge renovation funds every year. But in reality, not even a single brick has been repaired." Yet Salius would not listen at all. He coldly threw out, "This is nothing but your lie." Then he directly tossed the documents in his hand aside. Looking at the man before her, Kinna suddenly understood. She had never expected that this cold-blooded monster would also have moments when his emotions spun out of control. It seemed the rumors from her previous life were true. For Salius, who had been locked in a dungeon since childhood, Raffle was the only person who had ever given him warmth. In this world, Salius had only ever opened his heart to Raffle. So even with the evidence right in front of him, he was unwilling to suspect the one person who had been his salvation. To preserve her life, Kinna could only throw out her final bargaining chip. She looked at Salius and promised, "From now on, I will be the only light in your Majesty's world." She wanted to use herself to replace Raffle's position. "I promise I will be useful to you, so please believe me." But she had underestimated Salius's obsession with Raffle. Those words not only failed to move him, they completely enraged the madman instead. Salius roared, "Guards, lock this woman in the dungeon." Watching Kinna be taken away, Salius did not so much as blink. The guard warned coldly, "Before His Majesty gives a new order, you will stay here obediently." With the crisp sound of the iron lock falling into place, Kinna's escape route was completely cut off. At least her life had been preserved. After all, with Salius's temper, it would not have been strange if he had cut her down on the spot. Although she had been locked in this dark dungeon, as long as she was still alive, there was still a chance to turn things around. Speaking of which, because the Empire had been waging war year after year, its finances were already riddled with holes. At a time when money was so desperately lacking, Raffle was secretly transferring massive funds. As long as Salius was not a fool, Sooner or later, he would follow the clues and discover the truth. At that time, Rafel's plan to rebel would no longer be able to stay hidden. As long as she could help Salius uncover the traitor, Kinna could completely win his trust. When that time came, wouldn't freedom be within easy reach? Recalling the oath she had made to Salius, Kinna could not help laughing self-mockingly. Thinking about it carefully, whether in her previous life or this life, she had never become anyone's salvation. Salius had even been so self-important earlier, thinking she had come to throw herself into his arms. He really thought too much. If that madman saw her back beneath her clothes, he would probably only feel disgusted. It was covered in shocking scars. The abuse she had once silently endured was not a badge of honor to her at all, but a shameful mark of her past cowardice and helplessness. In fact, deep in Kinna's heart, she actually felt somewhat fortunate because Salius had never touched her, even though they were husband and wife in name. Looking at the pile of torn paper before him, Salius also fell into a daze. He had not forgotten that the first time Kinna met him, she had been terrified and collapsed on the spot, unable to support herself. From then on, she had kept herself shut in her room. In Salius's view, strong people protecting the weak was nothing more than nonsense weak people use to comfort themselves. He was even less likely to believe a weak woman. But the huge sum of money embezzled in the account books Kinna had sent was indeed too large to ignore. He remembered his days in the dungeon. Back then, only Rafel would secretly bring him pastries. Rafel had spoken to him through the iron bars. "Your Highness, you have grown taller again. I must prepare new clothes for you." That Rafel, who had once shown concern for Salius in the dungeon, had spoken of looking forward to his growth. But in reality, once the investigation results came out, all that warmth was torn to shreds. A subordinate reported with the documents in hand that Rafel's embezzlement of public funds was all true. Not only had he delivered huge benefits to nobles, he had even secretly transferred massive funds into a new merchant guild called the Zweig Merchant Guild. This so-called merchant guild appeared on the surface to be a legitimate business, but in reality, it was nothing less than a secret base for rebellion. They had established their headquarters in the back room of a tavern in the imperial capital, and according to intelligence, Rafel often came and went from this place. To infiltrate it, one had to give a specific password, and that password was the Dawn Dragon drink. Wearing a black cloak, Salius came alone to this tavern and spoke the password in a low voice to Kubo behind the counter. Kubo lowered his voice and pointed in a direction, the room at the end of the corridor. As soon as Salius reached the door, he heard voices from inside. The people in the room said, "Salius is a monster. I personally taught him his swordsmanship. No one understands him better than I do." The person speaking was none other than Rafel. This old fox was plotting with his accomplices. If we are even slightly careless, our entire merchant guild will be wiped out by him. Unless we can find a swordsman stronger than him, our plan cannot be put into action at all. An accomplice beside him was troubled. How could such an expert be found so easily? Rafel gave a cold laugh and answered, "If we cannot find one, then we can only raise one ourselves. As long as we join forces, we can definitely eliminate Salius completely." But before they could be happy for long, footsteps suddenly came from outside the door. The person who arrived directly called out his name, Rafel. As soon as this voice sounded, everyone in the room was stunned. Salius spoke coldly. "There is no swordsman in this world who can rival me. You are foolish enough not even to understand that." Rafel was so frightened that he could barely speak properly and cried out, "Your Majesty, why are you here?" Now he had truly walked into the trap himself. Salius slowly drew his long sword and pronounced coldly, "You are dismissed." Who could have imagined that Salius would act so quickly? There was no longer a single living person in the entire room. Rafel, who had once been so arrogant, had now become a cold corpse. His ambition and conspiracy came to a complete end here. Salius looked coldly at all of it and said only, "How boring." He thought of Kinna's promise to him, that she would become the only light in Salius's world. Salius merely snorted coldly and spat out two words. Utter nonsense. After being locked in the dark dungeon for 2 full weeks, the blood-covered Mad Emperor suddenly burst in. He not only melted the iron bars, but also brought back the news that the traitor had been killed, and even picked her up and carried her away. In this dark and damp dungeon, Even time had become blurred. Kina could no longer remember how long she had endured here. 2 whole weeks had passed. Every day, she could only eat hard, dry bread and drink a little clear water to keep herself alive. This kind of cruel torment was something ordinary people could not withstand. Kina secretly pondered in her heart. Salius must have already discovered Raffles' plot to rebel. Then why was he still keeping her locked here? She had clearly provided such important information. No matter how one looked at it, that should count as a great achievement. But she quickly reacted. Salius was a complete and utter demon. He could not be judged by common sense at all. Looking at the cold stone walls around her, Kina's heart was filled with despair. Was she really going to die here? Just then, a burst of chaotic footsteps suddenly came from outside. Someone was quietly urging Salius to bathe and change clothes first, lest others see him in this state and provoke even uglier rumors. But Salius did not listen at all. He coldly threw out, "Shut up. Do you want to die?" Hearing this familiar voice, Kina instantly became alert. Salius was walking toward her step by step, his face still stained with blood that had not dried. Before Kina could react, Salius directly reached out his hand. Violent fire magic erupted instantly. Even the thick iron bars were easily melted. Although she knew he was skilled in fire magic, strength at this level far exceeded her expectations. Salius spoke coldly. "I killed Raffle." This news struck like a bolt from the blue. She had thought that at most he would imprison the man, but she had not expected him to deal the killing blow directly. Salius looked down at her and said coldly, "I admit that you were useful to me." Looking at that blood-stained hand, Kina knew very well that this was her only lifeline. But right now, she did not even have the strength to lift her hand. Salius sneered, his eyes full of mockery. "How pitiful. You've only been locked up for a few days, and you're already this miserable." Then he removed his outer coat and coldly dropped a sentence. "You really are weak." But who could have imagined that this man, who had still been so icy just moments ago, would pick her up directly in the next second? This sudden action left Kina completely dazed. Salius was actually carrying her. What exactly was this madman thinking? She clearly should have felt afraid. Yet leaning in the arms of this blood-covered man, an inexplicable sense of safety rose in her heart. Watching Salius carry her away in large strides, all the attendants around them were stunned. Salius spoke coldly. "Those fools actually thought they could kill me. I slaughtered a dozen or so of them in their own stronghold. But there are still fish that slipped through the net outside. Sooner or later, I'll drag them out one by one." Seeing the man covered in blood, Kina grew worried. "Salius, are you hurt?" Salius merely gave a disdainful sneer. Those overconfident fools. If they had recognized their own worth sooner, they might have lived a few more days. This madman's methods were unimaginably cruel. Salius continued, "I plan to hang all those traitors' heads on the city gate for everyone to see, until the birds peck them down to nothing but white bones. I'll burn everything that remains to ashes, until not even a single speck of ash is left in this world." Looking at the insane man before her, Kina felt a chill run through her heart. She had originally thought Salius's trust in Raffle meant there was still a small trace of humanity in him. But now it seemed that it had been nothing more than her own fantasy. This cold-blooded monster had no heart at all. Kina knew very clearly that she had to leave this dangerous man as soon as possible. But before escaping, there was one thing she absolutely had to do. She had to win over Archbishop Elian. Only with Elian's support would she have any chance of surviving in this whirlpool of power. The moment Bestie saw Kina return safely, the maid finally breathed a sigh of relief. "Your Majesty, thank goodness you're all right. I was worried to death." Kina gently comforted her. "Thank you, Bestie." Not only had she been released, even her treatment was completely different from before. Looking at the table filled with delicious dishes, Bestie excitedly introduced them. "Your Majesty, look, today's meal is especially lavish." Bestie could not help sighing with emotion. The food has really been getting more and more refined lately. In the past, not only was everything cold, each meal only had 2 pitiful dishes. Hearing the maid say this, Kina also smiled helplessly. "You're right, but this treatment is already much better than what I had back in my homeland, so I never really took it to heart." Looking at the abundant spread, Bestie asked curiously, "Do you think His Majesty specifically ordered this?" Kina shook her head. "Most likely, the cooks are overthinking things. Earlier, Salius personally carried her back. Those people must have misunderstood their relationship, which was why they were rushing to curry favor." After hearing this, Bestie also thought it made sense. Yes, perhaps you're right. Kinna drank the tea in her cup and could not help praising it. This tea really tastes wonderful. Just being able to drink this means this trip to the castle wasn't wasted. Vesti, standing nearby, explained with a smile. I heard from the head chef that this tea is called Violia. It is specially blended with flowers, herbs, and honey from his hometown. Not only can it restore strength, it can also beautify the skin. After hearing this, Kinna finally understood. No wonder her body had been recovering so quickly lately, and even her skin had improved. Bestie continued. The head chef missed his hometown so much that he made a large stockpile all at once. If you like it, you can drink it anytime. If this tea could be sold, it would definitely make a huge profit. An idea suddenly appeared in Kinna's mind. She immediately called the maid over and instructed her, Bestie, help me bottle the Violia tea as a gift. Also, prepare a formal outfit for going out. Bestie asked curiously, Your Majesty, where are you planning to go? Kinna replied, There is someone in the temple I must meet. Kinna finally arrived at the temple. She had to settle this matter as quickly as possible because she needed the archbishop to issue a death certificate proving that she had died from the poison that would be fatal within 6 months. In the original novel, Elian was the one who ultimately declared Kinna dead. Not only that, Elian was also a formidable opponent. Compared with Lu Shan, who was innocent and like a big boy, Elian was the type who radiated mature charm from head to toe. In Kinna's memory, Elian was far more popular among female readers than Lu Shan. But this temple was absurdly large. As the archbishop, Elian should be in the main temple, right? As it turned out, the place was as huge as a maze. Before the two of them could even find the main hall, they got completely lost in the garden. Looking at the identical scenery all around them, Bestie began to panic. Maybe we should go back first. Now things were bad. They could not even find the way back. This trip to the temple had only just begun, and they were already stuck at the first hurdle. Who would have thought that before Kinna and Bestie could even ask for directions, they would stumble into a huge piece of gossip? Up ahead, a woman was speaking with Archbishop Elian. Elian spoke apologetically. I am sorry. That sentence instantly left the two eavesdroppers dumbfounded. I simply don't feel that way about you. The dignified queen of the empire actually wanted to fake her death and escape, and her only ally was the powerful archbishop. But just as the plan was about to succeed, the tyrannical emperor suddenly blocked her path. Bestie, hiding behind a pillar, stared in disbelief. She muttered softly, Is this really the temple? Kinna answered helplessly, It is. And it's even the most sacred central temple. Who could have imagined that in such a solemn place, they would witness gossip about the archbishop rejecting someone? Looking at Elian's cold back, Kinna recognized him at once. With that appearance, he was definitely Archbishop Elian. He was exactly the same as described in the novel. With a face like that, it was no wonder women came to him on their own. Even as a clergyman, his looks were truly impossible to ignore. Looking at the handsome blonde man not far away, Kinna whispered to the maid beside her, He should be Archbishop Elian. Hearing this, Bestie was completely shocked. She whispered in surprise, He's actually that young? I thought he would be an old man. This man truly exuded charm. But facing such an unmoved and difficult person, could she really win him over? Elian suddenly asked, Are you lost? This startled the two people hiding behind him. They had not expected to be discovered so quickly. Elian continued, Please allow me to guide you. Come out. Only then did Kinna react. This man was not merely a clergyman. He was also a hidden master swordsman. No wonder his senses were so sharp. Since they had already been discovered, Kinna simply walked out openly. When Elian saw that the person stepping out was Kinna, he was somewhat surprised. But he quickly reacted and bowed respectfully. It is my honor to meet you, Your Majesty. I am Elian, Archbishop of the Central Temple. Kinna asked in surprise, You know who I am? Elian smiled faintly and explained, I was also present at your entrance ceremony into the palace. A beautiful face like yours could never be forgotten after seeing it once. But Kinna was not fooled by sweet words. Back then, she had clearly been wearing a veil. How could this man possibly have seen her clearly? Bestie, however, became excited first. Though Kinna had doubts in her heart, now was not the time to dwell on them. She took the initiative and said, Archbishop Elian, there is something important I wish to discuss with you. To build a closer connection, Kinna took out the gift she had prepared in advance. Please try this. It is a tea specially made by our castle's head chef. Elian did not refuse and answered with a smile. Thank you for sharing such a rare delicacy with me. I'll go brew the tea at once. After it was brewed, Elian took a sip. The flavor instantly refreshed his entire spirit. Elian could not help praising it. I have never had such delicious tea before. If this were released on the market, it would definitely become extremely popular. Kinna smiled and said, to receive your praise is truly my honor. After the pleasantries were over, Elian took the initiative to get to the point and asked Kinna what important matter had brought her here today. Looking at the gentleman before her, Kinna remained extremely cautious inside. A man who could become archbishop at such a young age was definitely no simple character. If she let herself be deceived by his gentle appearance, she would be completely finished. Kinna directly put forward her bargaining chip. I can help you solve your current troubles. Hearing this, Elian was clearly surprised. My troubles? Kinna smiled slightly and directly stated the secret he had hidden most deeply. You have been having nightmares every night lately, haven't you? And in truth, you have been secretly searching for the whereabouts of the Saintess, correct? This time, Elian could no longer sit still. I have never mentioned this matter to anyone. How exactly do you know? As it turned out, ever since childhood, Elian had been able to hear divine revelations in his dreams, telling him to search for the Saintess's whereabouts. 1 year later, he would meet Flora and recognize at first glance that she was the Saintess. Faced with his questioning, Kinna had long since prepared her explanation. Because I also received a divine revelation in my dreams. God told me to inform you of the Saintess's whereabouts. She could not exactly tell him that she had transmigrated here and read the script. So using divine revelation as an excuse was obviously the safest method. Hearing this explanation, Elian was clearly doubtful. Half believing, he asked, Your Majesty, did you truly receive a divine revelation? Although Kinna felt a little guilty inside, she absolutely could not show weakness at a time like this. If she lost in terms of momentum, this deal would be completely impossible. Kinna steadied herself and answered firmly, That's right. I dream of these things every night. Hearing about the divine revelation, Elian finally became anxious and pressed her. Where exactly is the Saintess? Kinna, however, did not panic at all. She answered calmly, If you want to know, that's fine. But you must agree to one condition. Elian asked in confusion, What condition? Kinna directly revealed her trump card. She said each word clearly. 6 months from now, I want you to use your authority as Archbishop to publicly declare my death. As soon as she said this, Elian froze completely. Who could have imagined that after going through so much trouble to seek cooperation, the request she made would be something like this? Hearing this outrageous request, Elian smiled and asked, That is indeed a rather unusual request. May I ask why? Kinna did not hide it either and laid everything out plainly. I intend to fake my death and escape, then live a new life of my own. Hearing this, Elian sighed and spoke with some sympathy. It seems your situation is indeed even more difficult than I imagined. Kinna followed up smoothly. That is why I need you to help me issue a death certificate. Hearing this insane plan, Elian asked with some amusement, What makes you think I won't go straight to the Emperor and report you? Kinna, however, appeared confident. She answered calmly, Because you resent my husband. That remark struck the key point. Elian pressed further. Why would you think that? Kinna directly presented the evidence. I checked the treasury ledgers. Over the past few years, the temple's budget has been drastically cut. This was entirely Salius's personal decision, because from the bottom of his heart, he looks down on clergymen. He hates both the weak and those who call themselves pure. That is why he targets the temple at every turn. Anyone who is targeted so baselessly would harbor resentment, especially someone as proud as you, Archbishop. Hearing this, Elian smiled and sighed. You truly are a perceptive woman. Then he gave his promise. Very well. I will help you, Your Majesty. This even surprised Kinna herself. She had not expected things to progress so smoothly. Elian mentioned a prophecy. When a Saintess awakens to love, she will bring a miracle to this world. This is the divine oracle I often hear in my dreams. So no matter what, I must find the Saintess as soon as possible and protect her. Kina immediately understood the man's thoughts. He must have already guessed that once the saintess truly appeared, Salius would definitely kill her without mercy. After all, that man could not tolerate any threat. With the Archbishop's declaration, Kina finally felt somewhat reassured. Thank you. It is truly my honor to have such a powerful ally as you. Then allow me to tell you where the saintess is. Night fell. This negotiation finally came to an end. On the way back, Kina finally felt a little more at ease. Since she had won Elian over, that crucial death certificate was basically secured. But before she could breathe a sigh of relief, the person walking toward her instantly froze the atmosphere. Who would have thought Salius would appear at this moment? Kina froze completely. She had never expected to be caught red-handed by him here. The two sides stood stiffly in place. Salius walked toward her step by step and spoke coldly. So you went out. Where exactly did you go? The Tyrant Emperor stormed into the Queen's chamber late at night, and the first thing he said was to question whether she had brought another man. Faced with this deadly scene of being caught in the act, the Queen not only did not panic, but even planned to drag the Tyrant into selling tea. Facing this sudden interrogation, Kina had to immediately come up with an excuse. Otherwise, her previous plan would completely fall apart. She forced herself to smile and answered that she had merely gone to the central temple. After all, as the Queen of the Empire, it was only proper that she go and worship there at least once. After hearing her explanation, Salius did not even look at her properly. He simply left coldly with his attendants. He had clearly heard her, yet he showed no reaction at all. It seemed the rumors were true. This emperor utterly detested clergymen. By extension, he even disliked Kina, who had gone to the temple. With Salius's violent temper, he would normally have attacked the temple long ago. But now the temple's influence was vast, so he could only endure for the time being. Watching his departing back, Kina felt somewhat uneasy. Would this man really end up with the tragic fate of being killed, just as the novel described? Fortunately, Chancellor Raffle had already fallen. At least there would not be a second tyrant in this world. But the future situation was still difficult to predict. In the original novel's plot, once Alberg fell, Salius was destined to be eliminated. After all, in the original setting, he was the source of every disaster. His only purpose in life was to serve as a stepping stone for the protagonist, and in the end, he would be ruined and disgraced without leaving even a good reputation behind. Thinking of it this way, he was actually rather pitiful. His whole life had been spent as a tool of the plot. But Kina quickly shook her head. Now was not the time to sympathize with others. She should first think about how to protect her own life. Sympathizing with a tyrant who wanted her dead was simply meaningless self-indulgence. In the blink of an eye, daytime arrived. Kina began handling the palace accounts. The attendant beside her asked respectfully, "Your Majesty, shall I bring the next ledger?" Kina nodded slightly. She told him to bring it over. At this moment, Wodies came in carrying tea and snacks. "Your Majesty, I have prepared black tea and refreshments. Would you like to rest for a while?" Looking at Wodies' attentive attitude, Kina understood very clearly. It seemed the rumor that Salius had begun favoring her had spread even faster than expected. Even the people in the palace had begun shifting with the wind. Thinking back to the moment Salius had saved her earlier, although she had indeed been startled at the time, now that she thought about it, it was actually a rare turning point. Since he had been willing to release her from the dungeon because of her contribution, it meant this cold man was not completely unreasonable. If she could help the Empire solve its current financial crisis, perhaps she could completely change his attitude. So the most urgent thing now was to produce some achievements and win his trust. Looking at the ledgers before her, an idea flashed through Kina's mind. She planned to sell the tea from the castle. Hearing this idea, the maid Bestie was somewhat surprised, but Bestie quickly agreed with the plan. After all, the head chef had previously made quite a lot of tea and was currently worried about how to deal with it. But she explained with some concern, if the emperor finds out the head chef made so much tea in private because he missed home, it might be treated as rebellion. The head chef will surely be willing to hand over the tea. Kina sighed. I hope so. However, Bestie was still doubtful. Can selling tea alone really save the Empire's finances? This thing can't be sold for that high a price. Kina, however, appeared confident. Being cheap has the advantages of being cheap. More people can afford it. As long as we sell large quantities at small profits, we can make a fortune. So we need to draw customers from all over the nation to shops in the capital. Hearing this, Bestie was completely dumbfounded. People from all over the nation? How could that possibly be done? Kina smiled slightly and directly revealed her ultimate plan. We're going to make everyone fall madly in love with this tea. To ensure that this tea-selling plan could be carried out smoothly, Kina knew very well that relying only on the few of them was far from enough. They had to find a professional to help. Kina instructed the maid beside her, "Bestie, go and bring that person to me." Before long, the person was brought into the room. The man who entered appeared extremely nervous. "Pardon the intrusion. I'm the painter Roy. It is my honor to meet you." Looking at the overly nervous man before her, Kina could understand. After all, anyone suddenly summoned by the wife of the rumored tyrant would likely be frightened. Kina took the initiative to greet him. "I am Kina Celislanzak. I saw your paintings at a gallery in town before. They were truly beautiful." Hearing this, Roy was completely stunned. "Your Majesty, you really saw my paintings?" But Roy soon grew self-conscious again. "I'm truly sorry you had to see such unpleasant things. My paintings are actually rather strange." Kina immediately rejected his claim. "They are not strange at all." Kina continued encouraging him. "I believe that before long, your talent will be recognized by everyone." Hearing this, Roy was deeply moved and hurriedly bowed in apology. Although Roy was still not particularly famous now, Kina knew very well that in a few years, this man would become the top painter on the continent. In the original plot, he painted a smiling portrait of the Saintess Flora. As a result, a newspaper editor took notice of him and published it under the headline Ultimate Beauty. Overnight, he became famous across the entire land. Drawing back her thoughts, Kina got to the point. "Actually, I asked you here today because there is something I would like to request of you." Roy was nervous and asked carefully, "What is it?" Kina smiled and made her request. "Could you paint a portrait of His Majesty the Emperor?" Hearing this request, Roy was scared stiff. In truth, Kina had her own little plan. The current Flora had not yet awakened as the Saintess. Even if she was beautiful, no newspaper would publish the portrait of an ordinary village girl. So she had to choose someone with more impact. That person was Salius. As long as the Emperor's portrait was published, it would definitely cause a sensation. At that point, Roy's reputation would naturally rise. Once everyone saw that this tyrant was actually so handsome, they would absolutely be captivated by him. Moreover, Kina also planned to add Violia tea into the background of Salius's portrait. In simple terms, she wanted the Emperor himself to become the promotional ambassador for the product. The advertising effect would be maximized. But although the plan was perfect, there was now one fatal problem. With Salius's temper, how could he obediently cooperate as a model? It seemed she had to think of a way to properly please His Majesty the Emperor. Otherwise, the whole plan would fall apart. Kina had just returned to her room and had not yet had time to catch her breath when footsteps came from outside the door. The person who pushed the door open and entered was actually Salius. Kina was caught off guard, but on the surface, she forced herself to remain calm. "Your Majesty, why have you come so late?" But then she thought about it. Perhaps this was a good opportunity. She could take the chance to mention the portrait. Kina had just prepared to bow and get closer to him, but Salius coldly interrupted her. "I heard you brought a man into your room today." As soon as he said this, Kina was completely stunned. Why did his tone sound like he was catching her having an affair? How should she explain this now? Kina quickly explained, "I did indeed bring a man in, but he was only the painter I summoned during the day." Salius was somewhat surprised. "A painter? What business could you have with him?" Kina answered frankly, "I asked him to paint a portrait of you." Hearing this answer, Salius became even more confused. "Why paint me?" Kina directly stated her plan. "Because your portrait can bring in enormous wealth. It will become a rare source of income for the imperial family." This left Salius completely speechless. "You actually intend to sell my portrait?" Kina quickly waved her hand. "Actually, what we truly want to sell is a tea called Violia. After all, expensive paintings are not something many people can afford. But if we sell inexpensive tea, the sales will definitely multiply several times over." Kina's plan was simple. Print Salius's portrait in a newspaper, then place the tea pattern in the background. After all, in the entire empire, there was no endorser more handsome than the Emperor. As long as he was willing to show his face, the common people would definitely rush to buy it out of curiosity. Kina was still enthusiastically describing her blueprint. As long as this tea sells well, not only can it create employment, it can even stimulate the economy of the entire empire. But before she could finish speaking, Salius suddenly interrupted her. "You." Before Kina could react, Salius had already closed in right in front of her. "Do you like this face of mine that much?" This sudden move completely disrupted Kinna's train of thought. The Tyrant Emperor's handsome face had actually become a miraculous tool for selling goods. While the tea business boomed, a crisis quietly descended. The Saintess, who should have stayed in her village, vanished without a trace. When they met again, she was actually infiltrating the palace in a maid's uniform. Kinna muttered inwardly. Although she had no interest in Salius at all, she had to admit that this man's appearance was truly flawless. Looking at the woman before him, Salius coldly stated that he agreed to cooperate in painting the portrait. This surprised Kinna somewhat. She quickly thanked him, but in her heart, she still felt puzzled. Why was this strange-tempered tyrant so easy to talk to this time? Meanwhile, Salius, who had turned away, actually had other plans in mind. If this tea-selling plan did not work, then the consequences would be hard to say. Salius coldly left behind a threatening remark, warning Kinna that before the 6-month deadline arrived, he would definitely kill her with his own hands. A few days later, the portrait painting officially began. Roy painted nervously nearby. Although Salius complained verbally, he still sat there and cooperated. At the same time, Kinna also began fully preparing for tea sales. She took Bestie and the head chef around everywhere. Not only did they open several shops in the capital in one go, they also rushed to produce promotional posters overnight. When a newspaper printed with Salius's portrait was released, the entire capital completely exploded. The tyrant's handsome appearance instantly attracted everyone's attention. The development that followed went so smoothly, it was almost unbelievable. Who could have imagined that the tyrant everyone usually feared was actually so good-looking? People throughout the capital began madly snapping up the tea. Although the tea sold explosively well, Salius himself gave no response. This cold reaction made everyone uneasy. Kinna, however, took it positively. Since he had not come looking for trouble and had not tried to take her life, that probably meant he had tacitly accepted the result. On the other side, Salius received a letter. It was an application letter Kinna had written to him. She hoped to allow the head chef to return to his hometown, nominally to research how to improve the tea. After hearing this request, Salius said nothing. That attitude was clearly silent approval. When the head chef learned he could finally return home, he could hardly believe his ears. He thanked Kinna repeatedly with great emotion and vowed that he would definitely improve the quality of the tea. Kinna, however, felt that she was the one who should be thanking him. After all, the head chef's return home was a very crucial step in her plan. Kinna smiled and said to the head chef, "A hometown that can produce such delicious tea must be a very beautiful place. Please be careful on the road." The head chef nodded repeatedly, deeply moved. Before long, the head chef packed his luggage and set off. Watching his figure fade into the distance, Kinna felt somewhat uneasy. She did not have the head chef's pride in and longing for his hometown. After all, for Kinna, her homeland was not a warm place. As a daughter sent out from the Alberg kingdom, her past was filled entirely with painful memories. Kinna's mother died not long after she was born. In the royal palace, she was always treated coldly by the queen. After all, she was the child of the king's favored concubine, so the queen naturally disliked her. Even worse, compared with the queen's daughter Aisha, Kinna seemed inferior in every way. Aisha not only had noble status, she could even use rare white magic. In everyone's eyes, she shone like a goddess. As for Kinna, who had no special abilities, standing beside such radiance left her with only pity and humility. In the queen's eyes, Kinna was a thorn in her side. Whenever there was a chance, the queen would drag Kinna into the basement and brutally torment her with a whip. Whether in her past life or this life, what Kinna longed for most was actually only a place she could call home. In order to never return to those hellish days, she now had to struggle with all her strength, fight, and seize what she needed. As long as she could escape Salius and obtain freedom, she would surely be able to find a true place where she belonged. Before she knew it, 2 months had passed. The time until the poison took effect was drawing closer and closer. On this day, Elian came to visit on his own initiative. The imperial family's Veolia tea is extremely popular now. Kinna answered modestly, "It is thanks to your support, Archbishop, that I had the courage to start this business." Elian continued teasing her. "It seems your majesty is the true mastermind behind this business. Even the tea in the background of the emperor's portrait in the newspaper was your idea, wasn't it?" Kinna openly admitted it. "That is indeed the case. I simply wanted to use His Majesty the Emperor's beauty to draw everyone's attention." After hearing this, Elian smiled approvingly and praised the idea as truly clever. But then Elian changed the subject. However, Your Majesty, wouldn't you yourself be even more suitable as the model? This sudden question made Kinna pause. Elian smiled and continued. If a beauty like you were to personally appear, you would surely attract everyone's gaze as well. Kinna smiled somewhat embarrassedly and politely replied that he was overpraising her. But Kinna knew very well in her heart that this man's words came so smoothly. He was clearly experienced in romance. Kinna smiled and explained that she did not want to attract that kind of attention, nor had she ever thought of becoming any sort of model. In truth, Kinna had her own considerations. Once she successfully escaped and regained her freedom in the future, if this face became known to everyone, her future hidden life would become troublesome. Kinna quickly changed the topic and asked whether the Archbishop had specially come today because he had some warning to give. Elian smiled slightly and answered, I came specifically to visit you, Your Majesty. Kinna asked curiously, then what exactly did you want to discuss with me? Elian suggested changing locations to talk. After they moved elsewhere, Elian directly revealed the investigation results. He had already sent people to search every village in the West, but they had not found any young woman with pink gold hair and crimson eyes. Hearing this news, Kinna asked in disbelief, really? Now things had become strange. According to the original novel's plot, Flora should have been obediently staying in her hometown at this time, but now she had actually disappeared without a trace. Could the plot have already begun to deviate? Elian began to grow suspicious. Your Majesty, the things you told me before weren't merely to use me, were they? Faced with the Archbishop's questioning, Kinna could only grit her teeth and deny it, answering that she had absolutely not deceived him. Elian was clearly not so easily convinced and continued asking whether this was the truth. Kinna quickly swore earnestly that she had indeed received divine revelation in her dreams. After all, only by involving the gods could she explain how she knew the future. Although she temporarily fooled him, Kinna knew very clearly that if Flora never appeared, Elian would sooner or later part ways with her. If she could not obtain that fake death certificate, her escape plan would completely fall apart. Kinna could only stabilize him first, promising that she would definitely find the Saintess and hoping the Archbishop would give her a little more time. Fortunately, Elian finally relented and said he was willing to believe her once more. This finally muddled through the situation for now. After all, Elian was the most crucial part of the plan. She absolutely could not fall out with him at this stage. But where exactly had the Saintess gone? If they still could not find her, this cooperation would be finished sooner or later. To find the missing Flora as quickly as possible, Kinna immediately sent her trusted maid Bestie to the western villages to gather information. This concerned her upcoming fake death plan, so absolutely no mistakes could be allowed. In the blink of an eye, a week passed. Bestie returned dejectedly, without even one useful clue. Now Kinna could no longer sit still. Since she could not rely on others, Kinna decided to personally take Bestie out of the palace to search. But after searching for half a day, they still found nothing. Now, Kinna began to feel uneasy. How could the original plot have deviated so much? Was it because Raffle had fallen earlier than expected, causing a butterfly effect? Or had her act of selling tea unintentionally changed the direction of the story? But panicking now was useless. Kinna forced herself to calm down. As long as Flora was still in this world, there would definitely be some trace to find. As long as Salius and Raffle both disappeared, this world would regain peace, just like the ending of the novel. So no matter what, the most urgent matter now was still to find Flora first. But the problem was that the world was so vast. Where exactly should they search? The broken trail was enough to drive someone mad. Bestie looked at the new recruits training not far away and sighed. They're training new maids here again. I heard the training in Alberg was already harsh enough. I didn't expect it to be no easier here. Kinna sighed and replied, it really isn't easy. Even I'm almost exhausted. Just then, Bestie noticed someone especially eye-catching in the crowd. She could not help exclaiming, that woman is so beautiful. Following Bestie's gaze, Kinna looked over and froze. Wasn't that Flora? whom they had been searching for all this time. Looking at the familiar figure before her, Kinna was completely stunned. How could she be here? The original Saintess had actually snuck into the imperial palace as a maid. Yet the archbishop said he could sense no divine power from her. Meanwhile, the Tyrant Emperor had already begun secretly investigating my background. In this deadly game of identity and power, who was truly the mastermind behind the scenes? The people nearby were still whispering, saying that with such beauty, this girl would surely become a senior maid in the future. But Kinna felt something was wrong. In the original novel's plot, Flora had never worked as a maid in the imperial palace. This deviation in the plot was simply too outrageous. Looking at Flora before her, with that iconic long pink gold hair, she truly was so beautiful that people could not look away. As expected of the heroine of the original novel, her looks were beyond criticism. In the original story setting, aside from the unmoved Salius, she captivated almost every male character. Looking at this Saintess with her built-in halo, Kinna could not help sighing inwardly. What did it feel like to be cherished by the entire world as its center? She herself was merely a supporting character, one who might not even know how she died someday. Fortunately, they now finally knew Flora's whereabouts. Kinna immediately told Elian the news. But who could have expected that after Elian looked in that direction, he would simply shake his head? Is that woman truly the Saintess? Why can't I sense anything at all? Now, it was Kinna's turn to be dumbfounded. Elian continued explaining that the gods had granted him the ability to distinguish the Saintess. But from Flora, he could not sense anything. Kinna hurriedly argued, that is absolutely impossible. The Saintess I saw in my dream was definitely her. I have already confirmed it. She is Flora from the Western Village. There can be no mistake. Elian sighed. Since you are so certain, then let us observe her for a while first. Once her identity is confirmed, I will immediately bring her back to the temple and protect her. Kinna was still somewhat unwilling to accept it. Even if you cannot sense anything now, can't you tell that she is special? Her whole being is practically glowing. But Elian simply smiled. In my eyes, you are the more beautiful one. Kinna only felt that this man was putting on an act. She smiled and replied, Archbishop, there is no need to say things you don't mean. Elian, however, explained with a serious expression that every word he said was sincere. Looking at the man before her, whose mouth was full of sweet words, Kinna suddenly fell into a daze. The past she had deliberately forgotten surged back all at once. In that so-called home, she had never heard a single word of praise. There had only been endless insults and disgust. Just because she had no talent for magic, even her black hair and appearance had become reasons for punishment. The pain of those whips falling on her body was still vivid even now. Elian saw Kinna's concerns and comforted her gently. It's all right, Your Majesty. Even if we cannot confirm the Saintess's identity right now, I will absolutely stand on your side. Hearing this, Kinna was somewhat surprised. She had not expected him to say that. Elian continued with a heartfelt confession. You should not be locked in a cage like a canary. I sincerely hope you can obtain freedom. In the future, no matter what trouble you encounter, you may come to me at any time. Kinna thanked Elian. To express her gratitude, Kinna took the initiative to give him the newly improved tea. If you like it, you could take some of the new Veolia tea blend back with you. This time, the flavor is even better than before. Elian gladly accepted. Then I won't stand on ceremony. The two walked and chatted. Elian sighed that he himself was also a loyal fan of this tea. Kinna responded politely, hearing you say that truly makes me happy. Just as the two were about to say goodbye, Kinna suddenly stopped in her tracks. Who could have expected Salius to be standing right ahead? What she feared really had come. Salius walked straight toward them. Kinna and Elian could only hurriedly bow, but this tyrant did not even give them a glance. With a cold face, he brushed past them. His attitude clearly showed he was unhappy. Why was this man even more frightening than usual today? Was it because Elian was here? After all, he had always shown no kindness toward people from the temple. Salius was in an extremely foul mood. Another man. In his eyes, Kinna had first brought that painter into her room, and now she was chatting and laughing with Archbishop Elian. What exactly was this woman trying to do? This irritation made the bloodthirsty impulse in his heart rise again. In truth, he had always carried an inner demon. As long as he stopped fighting, the darkness of the past would once again wrap itself around him. Just then, a knock came from outside the door. A maid entered carrying tea. As Salius drank the Veolia tea that had been brought to him, he discovered something unbelievable. The more of this tea he drank, the faster the bloodthirsty impulse in his heart calmed. Could this tea truly possess some kind of magic? This made him think of Kinna, that woman who had once solemnly vowed she would become the only light in his life. When she first came to the Empire, she had clearly been like a frightened little mouse. Yet now she could produce this miraculous tea. Which one was the real her? To uncover the truth, Salius summoned a maid and immediately ordered his adjutant to go to the Alberg Kingdom. He had to investigate Kinna's past thoroughly. Meanwhile, in the Alberg Kingdom, everyone was going crazy over another person. That person was Kinna's younger sister, Aisha. Aisha used her miraculous white magic to heal an old man who could barely even stand. In everyone's eyes, she was simply a goddess descended to earth. In the eyes of the people of the Alberg Kingdom, Aisha was the embodiment of perfection. By contrast, Kinna, who had been sent away for a political marriage, had become the negative example everyone talked about. Everyone believed Kinna was a useless woman who only knew how to chase men, while Aisha was the angel who would save them. After the event ended, the queen praised Aisha's performance endlessly. In the queen's view, as long as Aisha could successfully inherit the throne, she would be able to unite the entire country and even help the kingdom regain its freedom. The queen began complaining again. Ever since they became a vassal state of the empire, life had become increasingly difficult. The woman shifted all responsibility onto Kinna, believing that if Kinna had been able to win the emperor's favor, the country would not have fallen to this state. Aisha, sitting nearby and listening to these words, felt a trace of sympathy for Kinna. In her view, Kinna might currently be suffering some kind of torture in the empire, or perhaps she might already be dead. Just then, a burst of urgent shouting suddenly came from outside. Someone was calling Aisha's name loudly. A mother holding a child was outside, pleading bitterly and hoping Aisha would use white magic to save the child. But before Aisha could express her stance, the queen beside her coldly refused. "You absolutely cannot help them." Aisha felt somewhat unable to bear it. "But they're begging so pitifully. Are we really not going to help?" The queen's attitude was extremely firm. "Absolutely not. Your white magic can only be displayed in lecture halls." In the queen's eyes, this miraculous magic was merely a political tool to consolidate their position, not something to be used for charity. Faced with her mother's forcefulness, Aisha eventually compromised. "I understand, mother." Watching the carriage leave without mercy, that mother could only cry out in despair behind them. Inside the carriage, however, Aisha wore a cold expression. In her eyes, these people were poor and sick purely because they deserved it. Just like her useless elder sister Kinna, who could only be sent off to become the tyrant's queen. The scene shifted back to the imperial palace. A maid led someone before Salius. "This is Flora, who has just been promoted to senior maid." Flora stepped forward carrying a tea tray. "It is my honor to meet you, your majesty. My name is Flora Owen." To humiliate his newlywed wife, the tyrant emperor actually announced at the national dueling tournament that the current queen would be given as the champion's prize. Faced with this ultimate humiliation, watch how Kinna turns the tables from a desperate position. Salius looked over the woman before him and coldly asked, "Which noble family are you from?" Flora lowered her head and answered that she was merely a commoner, not a noble at all. In the imperial palace, senior maids were basically all of noble birth. For a commoner to climb to this position was practically unprecedented. The maid beside her quickly spoke up on her behalf, doing her utmost to assure the emperor that although Flora was only a commoner, her talent was absolutely 1 in 100, and she would surely serve His Majesty well in the future. Just then, a report suddenly came from outside the door. The people sent to the Alberg Kingdom had returned. The visitor respectfully presented the report and brought back the latest information about Kinna. Salius dismissed the maids and coldly stated that there was nothing for them to do here. After the unrelated people withdrew, Salius immediately got to the point and asked about the results of the investigation in the Alberg Kingdom. His subordinate quickly presented the report, saying that this queen's reputation in her homeland was simply rotten to the core. Bad rumors about her were everywhere. This surprised Salius somewhat. In his eyes, Kina was either a timid and bullied weakling or a deeply calculating woman. How could she have ended up with a reputation ruined beyond repair? Salius frowned and coldly pressed him about what the rumors were. His subordinate continued reporting nervously. In the eyes of the people of the Alberg kingdom, compared with her younger sister, Kina was simply a useless good-for-nothing. Not only did she usually behave recklessly in the castle, there were even uglier rumors. Salius listened expressionlessly without saying a word. The subordinate could only grit his teeth and continue reading. It said this new queen had a chaotic private life and especially liked surrounding herself with men. At night, she often fooled around with different men, and she even brought men back to her room during the day. The subordinate finally managed to finish reading the report and did not even dare to breathe loudly. Salius was completely enraged and directly smashed the cup in his hand to pieces. Salius's disgust for Kina had now reached its peak. In his eyes, women like this, who only knew how to please men, were the most contemptible. She did not even have the ability to survive by relying on herself. She was simply beyond saving. Looking at the cup fragments on the floor, Salius stepped on them directly. He sneered and muttered to himself, "Since you want so badly to become a man's plaything, then as your husband, how could I not satisfy your wish?" The scene shifted, and unexpected news spread through the imperial palace. Kina could hardly believe it. Salius had actually taken the initiative to invite her to have dinner with him. Bestie beside her was quite excited. His Majesty must really like you. Now many problems can be easily solved. But Kina could not feel happy at all. Was it really that simple? Although this worked in her favor, something still felt wrong. Kina felt that she had not won Salius's favor at all. After all, when they had run into each other in the corridor, that tyrant had not even glanced at her. Bestie, who was beside her, did not think so. With an excited look on her face, she firmly believed that the Emperor absolutely cared about her mistress. But Kina had no time to dwell on that, because she only had 4 months left. If she could not change her fate, she would die according to the original plot. Fortunately, Archbishop Elian had already taken her side. Kina calculated inwardly that as long as she could obtain a separate residence as soon as possible, she could completely distance herself from that tyrant husband. Just then, the person beside her suddenly grabbed her and urgently called out, "Your Majesty." For tonight's dinner with the Emperor, Bestie was even more excited than the person involved. She patted her chest and guaranteed that tonight she would definitely dress her mistress up to be the most beautiful woman there. But Kina's heart was very calm. This was nothing more than a social engagement where everyone had their own schemes. Still, for the sake of her next plan, she also had to show the presence befitting an empress. Once everything was ready, Bestie stared at her in a daze. "Your Majesty, you are truly breathtaking today. His Majesty definitely won't be able to take his eyes off you." Kina smiled and thanked her. "Thank you, Bestie." But Kina's mind was perfectly clear. How could a tyrant who only knew slaughter all day possibly be captivated by a woman? Looking at the gorgeous gown she was wearing, Kina remembered that she had gone to great trouble to snap it up from a famous boutique in the imperial capital. In Kina's eyes, this was no ordinary dress. It was her future escape route. As long as she could successfully break free from Salius, this dress would surely fetch a good price later. When the time came, it would become important funding for her flight. Kina took a deep breath. She firmly believed that the plan ahead would definitely go smoothly. Kina took the initiative to curtsy to Salius and greeted him politely. "I greet your Majesty." But Salius said nothing. He only looked at her coldly. Kina took her seat with the help of the attendants. Her heart sank. Could this man have noticed that her outfit today was different from usual? But judging from Salius's reaction, he did not look captivated at all. Instead, his entire body radiated a gloomy pressure. Why did this tyrant look even more irritated than usual? Had something happened? The meal was unbearably awkward. The entire dining room was left with only the sound of knives and forks clinking. Kina kept muttering inwardly. This atmosphere was completely different from what she had imagined. She had originally planned to take this opportunity to mention moving to a separate residence to Salius. But now the atmosphere was so heavy that she simply could not find a chance to speak. The more Kina thought about it, the more puzzled she became. Since this man kept a cold face and refused to speak the entire time, why had he invited her to dinner in the first place? Just as she was utterly confused, Salius suddenly spoke. "You must attend next week's swordsmanship tournament with me." Kina asked in disbelief. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" It turned out that this so-called tournament was an extremely important traditional event in the Empire. Knights would fight to the death in the arena. The winner would not only receive a trophy of honor, but also a generous reward prepared personally by the Emperor. Kinna confirmed hesitantly. The swordsmanship tournament? You want me to accompany you? Salius's tone was very calm. That's right, as my wife. Although Kinna was full of doubts, on the surface, she could only agree for the time being. She even could not help suspecting whether this tyrant truly intended to acknowledge her. In the blink of an eye, the day of the tournament arrived. The entire arena was packed with people, and the cheers were loud enough to nearly overturn the roof. Everyone was enthusiastically discussing who would win the final championship this year. Kinna sat in the stands and watched it all. She discovered that the knight order here was indeed different. They did not care about birth or background at all, only strength mattered. No wonder most of its members were rough commoners. The tournament venue was filled with roaring voices, and the sound of horns echoed throughout the arena. Everyone was going wild for this grand event. Salius stood on the high platform, looking down at the warriors below, and announced coldly, "Offer me your hot blood. Whoever wins this year's championship will receive a special prize." At this point, the corners of Salius's mouth lifted slightly. He then announced, "This year's prize is Empress Kinna." The moment those words came out, Kinna, who was sitting on the throne, was completely stunned. She had never imagined that she would actually be treated as the prize for a duel. Salius smiled and announced that whoever won the final championship would gain the right to spend one night with the Empress as the ultimate prize. The dignified Empress of the Empire was actually being used as a prize for a duel. After a despicable knight won, he shamelessly declared that he would spend a wonderful night with her. At the critical moment, the Tyrant Emperor personally entered the arena to seize her back. And when he summoned her late at night, he even sneered and reminded her that she was only prey he had taken. Kinna could hardly believe her ears. This tyrant had actually said such words in public. Salius merely gave a cold laugh and cruelly reminded her not to forget her identity. "You are nothing more than an offering sent to me. That is your only value." After hearing those words, Kinna's heart went completely cold. All her efforts to please him before coming here had been wasted. This man loathed her even more than before. Now Kinna was fully awake. There was no way to reason with this madman. Salius was an utter villain. In his eyes, ordinary moral limits were a joke. She had previously hoped that, like his other subordinates, she could ask him for a separate residence and then run away. Now that seemed like nothing but a pipe dream. His generosity and rewards were only given to useful people. From beginning to end, she was only an offering. There was simply no other way out. The host began reading out the match list, but Kinna in the stands had no attention to spare. Salius's humiliating words just now had reminded her of the most disgusting memories of both her past life and this one. In the eyes of those arrogant men, all her efforts and sweat were worthless. They would only think that everything she had gained came from selling her looks. That prejudice and humiliation made her feel suffocated. But the current her had no strength to resist. She could only endure the humiliation before her with all her might. At that moment, the host's loud cry rang out in the arena. The final match had finally arrived. Sven and his opponent slowly walked onto the sandy field. This final battle would not only decide the champion, but also Kinna's fate. Salius sneered and took the initiative to speak, saying that he had heard rumors from the Alberg Kingdom. He then mocked Kinna as a temptress who specialized in seducing men outside. He pressed her step by step, asking whether she had been pretending to be obedient or whether she had been flirting with men behind his back all along. Kinna had never imagined that such absurd rumors would actually reach this tyrant's ears. In reality, she did not even have a single male friend. But now no one would believe her at all. All the dirty water had been poured onto her alone. Salius sneered and mocked her. "Isn't this exactly what you wanted? Now you can keep pleasing men the way you did before." Faced with such humiliation, Kinna did not choose to retreat this time. She coldly asked him in return, "I truly did not expect your majesty to believe baseless rumors. Is being led by such gossip truly befitting your noble status as emperor?" Those words instantly enraged Salius. He coldly questioned her. "What did you just say?" Kinna said that only what one saw with one's own eyes was the truth. Without the slightest fear, she coldly declared, "Compared to you, I may indeed be insignificant, but that does not mean I will bow my head to anyone." Faced with her provocation, Salius said nothing. It seemed that no matter how hard she tried, she could not change this man's thoughts at all. Saying even one more word now would be a waste of time. Just then, the duel in the arena had entered its fiercest stage. The situation on the field changed in an instant. In order to win, Sven abandoned all chivalry and directly used sand to blind his opponent. While the other man could not see clearly, Sven struck him hard and knocked him down. The referee hurriedly called a stop and announced that the winner was Sven. This completely enraged the audience below the stage. Everyone cursed loudly, accusing him of using filthy methods. Such despicable behavior was utterly unworthy of the spirit of knighthood. But Sven did not care about those curses at all. He shouted triumphantly that he was the strongest of the strong, and that no one was his match anymore. After winning the duel, Sven became arrogant to the extreme. He proudly shouted that tonight he would spend a wonderful night with the Empress, and even shamelessly declared, "One day, I will possess every woman in this country." Looking at this vulgar and despicable man below the platform, Kinna felt a powerful wave of disgust in her heart. Was she really going to be treated as a prize and handed over to him? At this critical moment, Salius suddenly stepped forward. He coldly announced that he would become the final opponent. This left even Kinna completely stunned. Who could have imagined that this tyrant, who had been mocking her coldly all along, would choose to personally enter the arena at this moment? The news that the Emperor would personally enter the arena caused the entire venue to explode. Everyone shouted excitedly, thrilled that they could see His Majesty fight with their own eyes. Watching Salius walk down into the arena, Kinna had no idea what madness had seized this man. Sven on the stage was now completely panicked as well. He stammered and tried to use the rules to stop him. "Your Majesty, you're not a member of the Knight Order. According to the rules, you cannot participate in the duel." Salius did not accept that argument at all. He coldly stated that he was the supreme commander of the Knight Order. He directly drew the long sword at his waist and said coldly that of course he was qualified to participate. Now Sven had no way out. Facing the supreme ruler of the empire, he could not refuse. Since he could not avoid it, Sven hardened his resolve and roared as he swung his sword directly at the emperor. But he had clearly underestimated Salius's strength. The other man merely turned slightly to the side and easily dodged. Not only did Sven fail to gain any advantage, he instead exposed all his own openings. Against a tyrant with such overwhelming strength, he had no chance of victory at all. The outcome was instantly decided, and Sven was trampled underfoot. In pain, he shouted that he admitted defeat and begged His Majesty to spare his life. At that moment, the entire audience boiled over. Everyone cheered, saying that His Majesty truly was invincible. Seeing the result below, Kinna finally breathed a sigh of relief. Thank heaven she had finally preserved her dignity and did not have to spend the night with that disgusting man. But after calming down and thinking about it, Salius had probably acted only because he could not stand Sven's despicable methods. After all, this tyrant had neglected her even on their wedding night. How could he truly care about who she belonged to? Although she could not understand what Salius was thinking, at least the crisis before her had been completely resolved. After returning to her own chambers, Kinna finally relaxed. Bestie comforted her from the side with heartache. Kinna said with lingering fear that at the time, she had truly thought she was finished. If she had really been given to that kind of vulgar man, it would have been a nightmare for her. At this moment, Bestie lowered her voice and brought new information. She had heard that the man called Sven was going to withdraw from the Knight Order. Kinna was somewhat surprised and quickly asked whether it was true. Bestie explained that Sven's leg injury was very serious and would take a long time to recover. It was basically equivalent to being expelled. Kinna could not quite understand. The other man was, at any rate, one of the stronger knights of Lonsac. How could the Knight Order let him go so easily? But after thinking about it again, that man was far too arrogant. The Knight Order truly did not need such a rotten apple. Just as the two were chatting, a knock suddenly came from outside the door. The person who came respectfully conveyed His Majesty the Emperor's order. The Empress was to go to His Majesty's chambers immediately. For Salius to suddenly summon her in the middle of the night, Kinna immediately became wary. As she walked toward his chambers, her heart was unsettled. Could it be because she had publicly talked back to him during the duel earlier in the day, and now he wanted to settle accounts after the fact? Aside from that, she really could not think of any other reason. But when she had heard that she was going to be treated as a prize and given away, anyone in her place would absolutely have been unable to endure that humiliation. The moment Kinna entered the room, her heart could not help pounding. This tyrant had called her over in the middle of the night. Could he be planning to lock her back in the dungeon, or even take her life right here? Looking at Salius standing before the window, Kinna could only steel herself and speak first. I do not know why your majesty has summoned me so late at night. Who could have expected that Salius would turn around with a cold smile and ask whether she had forgotten her identity? Right now, she was the prize he had won back from the duel. The cold-blooded tyrant suddenly lost control and kissed her forcefully. Yet the instant he pulled open her clothes, he stopped completely. The crisscrossing whip-shaped scars on the woman's back fully revealed the deadly secret she had hidden for years. Looking at this cold and ruthless tyrant before her, Kinna knew his nature very well. In the original story's setting, he was the only man who had never fallen in love with the original heroine. In the original story's setting, this man was an utter madman. His hands were stained with the blood of countless people. Hoping that such a tyrant would let her go was nothing but a daydream. Now, she had nowhere left to retreat. Kinna could not help asking softly, "Your Majesty, do you truly want to share a bed with a woman?" Hearing this, Salius gave a cold laugh and asked her in return whether she thought he was some kind of saint. Kinna immediately panicked and hurriedly explained that she absolutely did not mean that. Before she could react, Salius had already advanced on her step by step. He suddenly reached out and pulled Kinna into his arms. This sudden action left her completely dazed, and she could only cry out in panic, "Your Majesty." This was completely different from the cold tyrant of the past. Before, he had not even deigned to touch her. But now this man's attitude was clearly wrong. Held tightly in Salius's arms, Kinna was at a loss for a moment. Was this man serious? Salius had no intention of letting go. Instead, he held the woman in his arms even more tightly. The distance between them was so close that they could hear each other's heartbeat. Salius gave her no chance to retreat and lowered his head to kiss her. At that moment, the relationship between them completely crossed the line. This gentle kiss did not seem like something that cold-blooded tyrant would do at all, leaving Kinna unbearably embarrassed. Salius's movements grew deeper and deeper, giving the woman in his arms no room to withdraw. Kinna could only barely maintain her last shred of reason and softly call the other person's name. Salius stopped and asked quietly in some confusion, "What is it?" In truth, her entire mind was in chaos now. If this man continued, she was afraid she would not even have the strength to stand. Salius looked at her, and a trace of complicated emotion flashed through his eyes. Then he ordered her in a low voice to come over and directly took her hand, leading her deeper inside. Salius brought her straight to the bedside. This time, it was clear that he was serious. The man reached out to undo her buttons. The intention in his movements could not have been more obvious. Kinna completely panicked now. She had no idea how to deal with it. Amid the chaos, a fatal thought suddenly flashed through Kinna's mind. She had forgotten the most crucial thing. If this continued, those ugly scars on her back would be completely exposed before this tyrant's eyes. Kinna hurriedly called out, "Your Majesty." Salius stopped moving, but his gaze fell on her back. He murmured in a low voice, "What is this?" This time, she truly could not hide it. Even though the light in the room was dim, Salius still clearly saw those crisscrossing scars. Looking at these unexpected wounds, the man did not continue. Instead, he coldly ordered her to return to her own room. Kinna softly answered yes, then hurriedly got up, straightened her clothes, and left. Perhaps this was the best outcome. If she really became pregnant with this man's child, that would be the true beginning of disaster. But why did her heart still feel somewhat uncomfortable? Kinna said nothing more and merely took her leave softly. Salius remained alone in the empty room, his mind filled entirely with what he had just seen. Those scars were definitely not ordinary bumps or bruises. They were clear whip marks. Judging from the miserable sight of those overlapping wounds, it had definitely not been punishment that happened only once or twice. Someone had been torturing her repeatedly for a long time. Who dared lay such a cruel hand on her? This was completely inconsistent with the rumors he had heard in the Albert Kingdom. How could the woman who was said to have lived in dazzling glory end up in such a miserable state? Could it be that in her homeland, she had always suffered inhuman abuse? At the thought of this, a nameless fury surged up in Salius's heart. He even wanted to personally erase those glaring scars. But immediately after, he felt something was wrong. Since when had he started caring so much about whether this woman lived or died? Salius had always been a man who lived in darkness. To him, only the blood and wails of the battlefield could make him feel that he was still alive. That life of licking blood from the edge of a blade was the entirety of his existence. Until that woman appeared and completely shattered his original world of darkness. Kinna had once looked at him and promised word by word that she would become the only light in his life. Salius suddenly stopped moving. At that moment, the cold-blooded tyrant's heartbeat unexpectedly fell into disorder for reasons he could not explain. Salius had to admit that this woman Kinna had indeed had some special effect on him. But in his eyes, that was simply a colossal joke. She was merely a toy destined to die 4 months from now. But why, when he thought of that, could he not feel happy at all? He was clearly the one who had summoned her, yet his heart inexplicably felt irritated. Before he could sort out his thoughts, an urgent report came from outside the door. Someone was requesting an audience in the reception hall. With a grave expression, the man reported to him that there had recently been frequent abnormalities around Mount Granless in the north. Strange, beastly roars kept coming from the valley. Salius was somewhat surprised and asked what kind of beast cry it was. The man answered firmly that it was very likely the legendary wyvern. Hearing this name, the atmosphere in a room instantly became extremely heavy. Around 1,000 years ago, that place had once been the Empire's forbidden land. A traveler had cut at the wyvern's tail with a single strike, directly bringing a catastrophe of destruction upon the entire kingdom. What followed was an endless series of cold waves and plagues. The entire country nearly perished completely. In despair, the kingdom could only worship the wyvern as a god, and only then did they gain 1,000 years of peace. But now, how could a place that had been calm for 1,000 years once again echo with the cry of the wyvern? With a solemn expression, Salius said that the cry of the wyvern had always been an omen of disaster. They had to prepare in advance. He immediately gave the order for the man to send people to Mount Granless to investigate at once, while also summoning scholars to find a way to appease the wyvern's wrath. After the man accepted the order and withdrew, Salius began making preparations for the worst. Not only did they need to stockpile a large amount of food, they even had to strive to gain the support of the Tana Kingdom. Salius knew very well that drawing in the Tana Kingdom would be no easy matter. That country possessed the rarest resources on the continent. In the past, the Empire had tried to conquer it by force, only to suffer a setback. Now, aside from peace talks, there was simply no other path. Just as he was troubled by this, a knock suddenly came from outside the door. Someone had brought tea in. Flora respectfully placed the tea on the table, then lowered her head and withdrew. Salius watched her departing figure and, for a moment, could not recall her name. But to him, that was not important at all. The most difficult problem now was how to deal with those people from the Tana Kingdom. Looking at his reflection in the tea, he had actually already come up with an idea. Since conventional methods would not work, he would have to use extraordinary means. After drinking this cup of tea, Salius had already made up his mind. The tyrant had treated her as the winner's prize and even personally claimed her for himself. But in reality, she had only 4 months left to live. And at this moment, the disaster of the guardian wyvern was quietly descending. The atmosphere in the castle quietly changed. The maids passing by all took the initiative to curtsy and greet Kinna. Their attitude was far more respectful than before. Once they had walked a little farther away, Kinna quietly said to Bestie beside her, "Lately, everyone's attitude toward me seems different from before." Bestie leaned in and lowered her voice. "So you noticed it too? Ever since the night of that tournament, the way everyone looked at Kinna had completely changed. Rumors were spreading through the castle that although Salius had treated her as a prize, in the end he had personally claimed her for himself. This was actually the tyrant's unique way of showing love. But Kinna knew very well that thanks to this tyrant, she only had 4 months left to live. Still, thanks to these rumors, her treatment in the castle improved rapidly. Every day, she had endless delicious food to eat and even more new clothes than she could count. Since that night, Salius had never come to see her again. He had not even spoken a single word to her. This cold attitude made Kinna increasingly uncertain. She could not help wondering whether, after seeing the scars on her back, that man had completely lost interest. Or perhaps in his eyes, she was nothing more than a weakling who did not even know how to resist. As Kinna walked down the corridor, she ran into Archbishop Elian head-on. Elian smiled and greeted her first, asking how she was feeling today. Kinna knew very well why he had come. She directly asked him whether he had come to check on that person's situation. In order not to disturb the conversation that followed, Kinna turned and sent Bestie away. Elian was also frank and nodded in admission. It turned out that the person they were referring to was the saintess of the temple, Flora. In this life, she was actually working as a maid in the castle. Moreover, she had even been assigned to Salius's side and become his personal maid. This deviation from the plot was far too great. Elian looked around, then suggested in a low voice that they go somewhere else to talk. After all, there were eyes everywhere in this castle. As soon as they reached a secluded place, Kinna could not wait to ask, "What do you think of her now?" Elian sighed. "I still don't think she resembles the saintess." This was simply impossible to explain. "Since you are so certain, I will continue keeping an eye on her. However, I actually came to the palace today to request an audience with His Majesty." Kinna was somewhat surprised. "Has something happened to His Majesty?" With a solemn expression, Elian asked, "Do you know about the spring of trial in the temple? It is said that that spring is spiritually connected to the guardian wyvern on Mount Granless. As long as ripples appear on the spring's surface, it means disaster is about to descend. The disaster 1,000 years ago that almost destroyed the nation happened because the wyvern's heart was disturbed." Kinna immediately understood what he meant. "So what you mean is," Elian solemnly confirmed, "recently, ripples have indeed appeared in the spring of trial. Because you came from another kingdom, you may not be very clear about what this signifies." Kinna shook her head. This was indeed her first time hearing about it. But in reality, Kinna's heart was already filled with stormy waves. She had never imagined that the legendary guardian wyvern actually existed. In her memory, this part had never been mentioned at all. If history truly repeated itself, then the situation ahead would completely spiral out of control. If this country really were destroyed, where would the people living here go? For example, Wodies, who always greeted her with a smile and brought her tea and snacks, and Roy, who had been endlessly grateful because she had acknowledged his painting. These people were all living, breathing lives. How could she watch helplessly as disaster befell them? She was clearly only a puppet empress. Why did she have to worry about whether these people lived or died? Even she herself found this strange sense of responsibility inexplicable. Seeing her worried expression, Elian hurriedly comforted her. "Do not worry. Since I am the archbishop of this country, I absolutely will not sit by and do nothing." Hearing this, Kinna relaxed slightly. "Elian, hearing you say that puts me much more at ease." Elian said with some pride that although he might not look it, he was actually quite capable. Not only could he use white magic, his swordsmanship was also first-rate. But immediately after, Elian changed the subject and mentioned the swordsmanship festival that had recently been held. "I heard His Majesty made you the prize for the winner this time." Kinna hurriedly explained that although that had indeed happened, Salius had won in the end, so nothing had actually happened. Hearing this, Elian's expression darkened. Even if nothing had happened in the end, that tyrant's act of treating a person as a prize was absolutely unforgivable. It was simply madness. Seeing this, Kinna hurriedly waved her hands and explained that she was truly fine. Besides, nothing had happened that night. To Salius, she was not that kind of target at all. The moment the words left her mouth, Kinna suddenly realized that she seemed to have let something slip. This was equivalent to directly admitting that she and Salius had never consummated their marriage. Elian was also a clever man. The moment he heard this, he immediately understood what she meant. "You mean, since things had come to this, there was no point in continuing to hide it?" Kinna could only helplessly admit it. "Just as you can see, I actually do not have much charm, so that tyrant has no interest in me at all." Hearing Kinna mock herself for having no charm, Elian immediately became anxious. "That is not true. In my eyes, you are more beautiful than anything else in this world." Kinna was a little embarrassed by the praise and smiled as she said that it was too exaggerated. But Elian looked completely serious. "I mean it. From the first time I saw you, I have always thought so. This sudden directness left Kinna completely at a loss. Was this archbishop confessing his feelings to her? Elian suddenly realized that he had somewhat lost his composure. I misspoke. Please forget what I just said. After saying this, he hurriedly turned and took his leave. Clearly, he wanted to escape this awkward scene as quickly as possible. Watching Elian's departing figure, Kinna finally recovered slightly. This sudden confession had truly given her quite a fright. But after calming down and thinking about it, it made no sense at all. In the original fate, the only person he would ever fall in love with was Flora. So those words just now were probably only a momentary impulse from the archbishop. After returning to her room, Kinna was still restlessly thinking about what had happened with Salius before. Just then, a knock suddenly came from outside the door. Who is outside? But the moment she opened the door, she froze completely. The person standing outside was actually Salius. Kinna was somewhat incredulous. Your Majesty. Salius took the initiative to mention the wyvern's roar from Mount Granless in the north. Do you understand what this means? Kinna did not hide it. She said that she had just heard about it from Archbishop Elian. The moment he heard that name, Salius's expression changed. You want to see the Archbishop? Kinna hurriedly explained that they had merely happened to run into each other in the corridor, and that the Archbishop had come to request an audience with His Majesty. Looking at Salius's gloomy face, Kinna muttered inwardly. Just what was this tyrant sulking about? Salius sighed. Since the Archbishop has already explained it to you clearly, then you should also understand that we must prepare in advance against this disaster. But relying on the Empire's strength alone, we cannot withstand such a devastating calamity. He had decided to sign a peace treaty with the Tana Kingdom. This Tana Kingdom was no simple country. It was an island nation surrounded by the sea on all sides, and it had prospered through maritime trade. Its strength was second only to the Empire's. Hearing this news, Kinna began to wonder inwardly. In her memory, the two countries had indeed signed a peace treaty, but that was clearly a later plot point. Why was it happening ahead of schedule now? Salius said frankly that he would not beat around the bush. He hoped that Kinna would be responsible for the peace negotiations with the Tana Kingdom this time. Hearing this decision, Kinna was completely stunned. She could hardly believe her ears. This tyrant was actually handing such an important task over to her to lead. Looking at Salius's incomparably serious expression, Kinna realized something. This tyrant had actually begun to trust her. After all, ever since that night, when Salius had seen the scars on her back, she had thought she was completely out of the game. She had believed that all her previous efforts had been wasted. But now, it seemed things were not that simple. Since Salius had entrusted this task to her, then this was the best opportunity for her to prove herself. Kinna answered firmly, I understand. I will take on this task. In order to gain her freedom, she offered up a priceless ancient treasure. She had thought the peace talks would be guaranteed to succeed, but unexpectedly, the other king turned hostile on the spot and even directly postponed the negotiations. This completely disrupted all her plans. Salius looked at the woman before him, his low voice carrying a hint of scrutiny. Do you already have a plan? Kinna smiled slightly, with not the slightest panic in her eyes. Of course, I have already thought of how to handle the peace talks. This time, nothing will go wrong. Salius raised an eyebrow. You are quite confident. Kinna looked at him with a determined expression. Your Majesty, please trust me one more time. Kinna actually already had a plan in mind. As long as these negotiations could be handled smoothly, she would be able to move to a separate residence as a matter of course and completely escape this terrifying tyrant. But before departing for the Tana Kingdom, she still needed to prepare some special bargaining chips. Salius was somewhat curious. What exactly do you want to prepare? The day of departure soon arrived. This was also the first time Kinna had left the Empire since regaining her memories. The maid Bestie had already helped her pack her luggage. At the thought that she could finally go out and get some fresh air, Kinna could not have been happier. Now she could finally temporarily escape Salius and properly enjoy the air of freedom. But before she could be happy for even 3 seconds, reality dealt her a heavy blow. When she happily boarded the carriage, she discovered that Salius was already sitting inside. Why had this man come along too? Had he never truly trusted her from the very beginning? Inside the narrow carriage, the atmosphere instantly became awkward to the extreme. Salius kept a cold face the entire way, and Kinna sat beside him, feeling restless. Even her breathing became cautious. Fortunately, this time she had brought an absolute trump card with her. Looking at the heavy box in the corner, Kinna finally regained a bit of confidence. With this treasure, the negotiations this time would definitely not fail. Inside this box was the legendary ancient treasure. A rare treasure of this level was perfect as a gift for the peace talks. When Salius had first heard her proposal, he immediately sent people to a mysterious cave in the southern part of the empire. In the end, they truly found an ancient necklace, an exquisite goblet, and a lifelike fox statue. Looking at the rare treasures inside the box, Kinna actually felt somewhat guilty. In the original novel's plot, this batch of treasure was supposed to belong to the male lead. Now that she had intercepted it ahead of time, she could only silently apologize in her heart. Just then, Salius suddenly spoke without warning. "How exactly did you know the location of the treasure?" Kinna's heart startled, and she could only brace herself and make up a lie. She said that she had heard the legend back in the Alberg Kingdom and had only wanted to try her luck, not expecting to really find it. She could not very well tell the Tyrant directly that she had transmigrated here and knew spoilers. Fortunately, after hearing her explanation, Salius merely turned his head away indifferently and seemed to have no intention of investigating further. His unpredictable temper was truly impossible to understand. Before they knew it, the sky darkened. The carriage finally stopped in front of an inn. This suffocating journey had finally come to an end. The attendant respectfully led them into the room and introduced it with a smile. "This is the bedroom for His Majesty and Her Majesty the Empress." Hearing this, Kinna instantly froze. Did that mean she had to sleep in the same room as Salius? Although the two of them were husband and wife in name, they had always slept in separate rooms in the imperial palace. How could she possibly accept this sudden arrangement of sharing a bed? Kinna awkwardly tugged at the corners of her mouth and quietly asked the attendant, "Excuse me, are there any other empty rooms here?" The innkeeper explained with a troubled expression that it was truly unfortunate tonight. All the rooms were already full. Kinna really did not want to share a room with the Tyrant, so she tentatively asked whether she could sleep in the old storage room. This frightened the innkeeper badly. Letting the noble Empress sleep in an old storage room? If word got out, his inn would never be able to stay open. The innkeeper pointed at the room and strongly recommended it, saying that this was already the best room in the inn. They had put in great effort to welcome their honored guests, and it would absolutely be comfortable. Looking at the innkeeper's terrified appearance, Kinna knew she had no way out. Vesti smiled, curtsied, and took her leave, wishing them a pleasant night. Kinna screamed for help in her heart, but could only watch helplessly as the door closed. Now she truly had to share the same room with him. This was the first time she had to spend the night with Salius. The incident during the tournament did not count at all. That coal man had chased her away halfway through, but this time she had nowhere to run. Just then, Salius walked in wearing a sleeping robe. Kinna immediately held her breath nervously. Salius walked straight toward the bed. Every muscle in Kinna's body tensed, and countless terrible images flashed through her mind. However, to her surprise, this man actually laid down directly and closed his eyes. He made no extra move at all. Now it was Kinna's turn to feel awkward. So after all that fuss, she had been the only one overthinking things. But this also let her breathe a sigh of relief. As the lights in the room went out, only the sound of their breathing remained in the darkness. Kinna looked at Salius, who had already fallen asleep, and softly said, "Good night." Since the other person had no intention of paying attention to her, she was happy to enjoy the quiet and simply closed her eyes to sleep. She had thought she would be so nervous that she could not sleep all night. Unexpectedly, because of his coldness, she instead relaxed and soon fell into a dream. Late at night, something unusual suddenly sounded in the silent room. Kinna was awakened from her sleep and opened her eyes in confusion. Following the faint sound, she turned her head and discovered that Salius beside her was groaning in pain, his forehead covered in cold sweat. Kinna immediately realized that this invincible tyrant emperor of the empire was actually having a nightmare at this very moment. Who could have imagined that someone who was usually cold, ruthless, decisive, and merciless in killing would be tormented by a nightmare into such vulnerability? At this moment, he looked instead like an ordinary person of flesh and blood. Looking at Salius struggling in pain, Kinna suddenly remembered her former self. Back then, she had been locked in a dark dungeon, covered in wounds, and could only tremble in the endless darkness. Whether it was the tragic suffering of this life, or the pain of being devoured by loneliness in her previous life, whenever she was about to lose the strength to keep going, she had desperately longed for a hand to pull her up. Looking at the man before her, who was suffering in the same way, Kinna finally could not help reaching out. She gently touched his forehead. Unexpectedly, this action really worked. Salius's tightly furrowed brows gradually relaxed, and his entire body slowly quieted down. Looking at the defenseless man beside her, Kinna could not help sighing inwardly. Who could have imagined that the cold tyrant also had such a fragile side? Since the crisis had already been resolved, the exhausted Kinna finally closed her eyes as well and fell into a deep sleep. In the blink of an eye, it was the next morning. For the peace negotiations ahead, Kinna boarded the ship bound for the Tana Kingdom with her maid Bestie. Looking out at the endless blue sea before her, Kinna could not help praising the beautiful scenery. Bestie beside her also appeared very excited. This was the first time she had seen the sea with her own eyes. Just as the two women were relaxing, Kinna suddenly felt an unusual gaze staring at her from behind. She subconsciously turned her head to look. Those familiar red eyes were silently watching her from the shadows. The person standing there was indeed Salius. This sudden eye contact startled Kinna. She muttered inwardly that this man was as frightening as ever. He had clearly seemed rather docile last night. Salius merely stood on the deck, staring at her without saying a word. No emotion could be read from his eyes. After a bumpy journey across the sea, they finally arrived at the Tana Kingdom. Kinna had thought this negotiation would be a difficult battle. Unexpectedly, the moment they met, the king of Tana showed unusual warmth. He smiled and welcomed their arrival. This friendly attitude surprised Kinna somewhat. The king thoughtfully suggested that they go rest first. After all, Salius had once led troops to attack this place. Kinna had expected to receive a cold reception, but unexpectedly, the other side's attitude was so kind. Kinna took the initiative to step forward and curtsy, introducing herself gracefully. "I'm Kinna Seal's Lansac." Looking at Kinna's elegant bearing, the king could not help praising her. As expected of the Empress of the Empire, not only are you beautiful and moving, you are also exceptionally intelligent. The king said that he was very interested in the trends of the continent and hoped to hear more from the Empress. In order to express sincerity for these peace talks, Kinna had the prepared gifts presented. The box was filled with ancient treasures that had just been unearthed. Looking at the rare treasures before him, the king smiled and praised the gift as very charming. Seeing this, Kinna followed along and said that these were the Empire's most precious treasures and asked His Majesty the King to be sure to accept them. She had thought that since the gift-giving had gone smoothly, the cooperation that followed would also naturally succeed. But who would have thought that in the next second, the king's expression would suddenly change? He coldly refused the gift. Not only that, he directly announced that the peace negotiations would be postponed. Kinna instantly froze where she stood and looked at him in disbelief. This sudden change was completely inconsistent with the plot of the original novel. The peace talks were rejected, and the plot completely collapsed. A mysterious princess who had never appeared in the original story was actually suffering from an incurable disease and did not have long to live. In order to break the cycle of death, Kinna decided to forcibly rewrite her ending. The legendary genius pharmacist became her final lifeline. The king then said that although there was no room for discussion regarding the peace talks, since they had already come, Tana would still fulfill its duty as host and entertain them properly. Now things were bad. The peace talks had been rejected outright, and Salius and Kinna were left hanging in the room. The atmosphere was awkward to the extreme. Night fell. The fire in the fireplace burned brightly, but Kinna's heart was in complete turmoil. The original plot had completely collapsed. Every step from now on would be like walking a tightrope. Seeing Kinna weighed down with worries, the maid Bestie walked forward with concern and asked whether she was feeling unwell. Kinna shook her head and said she was just a little tired. Bestie sighed. After being tossed around all day, it was indeed enough to exhaust anyone. But in truth, what Kinna truly could not bear was not the tight schedule at all, but the murderous gloom Salius had radiated throughout the journey. Anyone staying beside him would feel as if they had lost a layer of skin. Even worse, the original plot had failed for the first time. Now she had completely lost her spoiler advantage. How exactly could she make the king of Tana change his mind? Bestie curtsied and told Kinna to rest well, then turned and withdrew. As the door closed, only Kinna remained in the room, facing a situation that had completely gone out of control. She had to think of a new countermeasure as soon as possible. After thinking until her head hurt, Kinna simply gave up struggling and decided to face this mess again tomorrow. After one night passed, she finally had the chance to come out alone and get some air. Only then did she feel as if she had come back to life. After all, during breakfast today, the gloomy pressure radiating from Salius had nearly suffocated her alive. The small bit of trust she had finally managed to build was probably going to be completely ruined again. After being worn out badly last night, Kinna was now exhausted and only wanted to be alone in peace. Just then, a strange cry suddenly came from nearby. It sounded like some kind of small animal. Before she could react, a black shadow darted out with a whoosh and jumped straight on her skirt. Taking a closer look, it was actually a little black creature with large ears. Looking at the fluffy little thing in her arms, Kinna felt as if she was about to melt from how adorable it was. She vaguely remembered seeing this kind of animal in the book. It seemed to be called an urkaho. Kinna gently picked it up and asked whether it had gotten lost. The little creature's whole body was soft and fluffy. Holding it in her arms was incredibly comfortable. Just as Kinna was happily playing with the little creature, a voice suddenly came from behind her. "Looks like this one really likes you." The sudden voice startled Kinna. Midorose smiled and said, "This little one usually doesn't get close to people easily. This really is rare." Kinna was a little puzzled, wondering who this person was. But judging from her splendid clothing, she had to be a noble young lady of no ordinary status. Since Kinna was staying in someone else's castle, she still had to observe proper courtesy. Kinna took the initiative to greet her and introduced herself as Kinna, the Imperial Queen who had just arrived yesterday. After hearing that, the other girl suddenly understood and said, "So you're the person my brother mentioned." The noble girl smiled and introduced herself. "I am Princess Midorose of the Tana Kingdom." Hearing that name, Kinna's heart sank. In the original novel, the Tana Kingdom clearly only had one prince. How had a princess suddenly appeared out of nowhere? The plot deviation was getting more and more outrageous. Midorose introduced the two little creatures. The black one was called En, and the white one was called Solia. Midorose said to Kinna with some emotion, "En is usually extremely wary of people. I never expected him to trust you so much today." Midorose looked at the little one in Kinna's arms and said with a smile that she liked him very much too, and that his fur color even matched her quite well. Kinna laughed along with her. The distance between the two of them instantly narrowed. As they chatted, Midorose suddenly extended an invitation, asking Kinna whether she wanted to visit her room. Hearing that invitation, Kinna froze outright, wondering if she had misheard. But since the other girl had invited her first, it would be rude to refuse. She could only follow Midorose to her room. The moment they entered, the white little creature happily came forward to greet them. When Kinna saw the decorations inside the room clearly, she was completely stunned. The room was filled everywhere with merchandise and plush dolls of these two little creatures. Someone with such a distinctive personality. If she had appeared in the original work, Kinna absolutely could not have forgotten her. It seemed Princess Midorose truly had never appeared in the novel at all. Midorose warmly invited Kinna to sit, then excitedly showed off her treasures. All of these were things her father had collected from various countries. In her eyes, urkaho were the cutest creatures in the world. Kinna smiled and agreed, saying she had also been completely charmed by the little ones. Hearing this, Midorose finally felt as if she had found a kindred spirit. She could not help complaining that her brother had come to take one look before, only to say that the place was too bizarre. Kinna, however, did not think so. She calmly advised her that being honest about what one liked was the rarest thing of all. Those words struck Midorose right in the heart, and she nodded repeatedly in agreement. Midorose was excitedly showing off all kinds of merchandise, enthusiastically recommending them without pause. Looking at the girl before her, who was talking nonstop, Kinna felt deeply moved. Midorose smiled so happily that Kinna could not help thinking of her previous life. Back then, she had also been obsessed with this novel, even buying piles of merchandise. But at that time, there had been no one around her who shared her interests. She had not even had a friend with whom she could share her joy. She understood that lonely feeling better than anyone. Looking at Midorose before her, Kinna made up her mind to become true friends with her. But just as she was about to speak, a violent coughing sound suddenly came from beside her. Midorose suddenly began coughing violently. Kina hurriedly asked, "Your Highness, are you all right?" But the coughing simply would not stop. This definitely was not an ordinary choking fit. The situation looked extremely bad. Kina anxiously shouted, "Someone, come quickly! Someone come quickly!" The door was flung open at once. A maid rushed in anxiously. "Your Highness, when did you return to your room? You suddenly disappeared, and everyone has been searching everywhere for you." The maid quickly handed over a potion. "Mituros weakly apologized. I'm sorry." She hurriedly drank the medicine, and only then did she slowly recover. Mituros explained somewhat embarrassedly, "I'm sorry. Whenever I talk about CACAO, I get so excited that I can't stop." Seeing that their master was all right, the two little creatures beside her also began crying out. Mituros gently stroked them. "I made you worry too. I'm fine now." Seeing this, Kina's suspended heart finally settled. But this princess's physical condition was clearly even worse than she had imagined. The maid respectfully bowed to Kina and spoke with some self-reproach. "You must be Her Majesty, Queen Kina. I am Maiden. I should have come to welcome you sooner. I was truly too negligent." Kina quickly waved her hand, indicating that she did not mind. Then she lowered her voice and asked whether Princess Miturosa's body had some serious problem. Hearing this, the maid's expression immediately darkened. In a low voice, she revealed a shocking secret. The princess had actually been receiving secret treatment all along. She was suffering from an incurable disease. The doctor said she did not have much time left. To Kina, this news was like a bolt from the blue. She never could have imagined this would be the case. Looking at the empty room, her mind was in utter chaos. Sitting by the bed, she finally figured out the crucial point. "I finally understand now. This is why the king of Tana refused that treasure." At this point in the original novel, Princess Mituros was probably already no longer alive. So that fox statue looked especially like the princess's pet. The moment the king saw it, he would think of his daughter, whose life was nearly at its end. No wonder he had reacted that way. Thinking of this, a thought arose in Kina's heart. She had to save Mituros. Although, as a fan of the original work, she did not want to casually change the direction of the plot. She truly could not stand by and watch such a young life fade away before her eyes. In the original setting, she herself had also been a short-lived person who was not supposed to survive more than half a year. Since she could rewrite her fate and life, how could she watch someone else walk toward destruction? Even if she was only an insignificant supporting character, she still wanted to take control of her own life. This time, she decided to completely change Miturosa's ending. However, to cure such a terminal illness, she could not rely on herself alone. She had to invite that person out of seclusion. That was right. It was the legendary genius pharmacist, Gamma. Late at night, I sneaked into the cold-blooded Tyrant's room. I had intended to slip away quietly, but I was caught on the spot. Not only did he not get angry, he instead grabbed my hand and ordered in a low voice, "Touch me." Even more terrifying, when I woke up the next day, he was actually lying in my bed. In order to save Princess Mituros, Kina thought of the divine physician Gamma. Although he had no reputation outside the empire, he only prepared medicine for top nobles. The king of Tana clearly did not know of his existence. But rumor had it that Gamma could cure all poisons and ailments. As long as she could persuade him to act, the princess would definitely still have hope. But how exactly could she contact this eccentric divine physician? Kina knew very clearly that Gamma was deathly afraid of Salius alone. If she wanted to move this divine physician, she had to have Salius write a letter personally. If they could successfully save the princess, the current deadlock in the peace talks would be resolved. This plan would benefit Salius as well. He had absolutely no reason to refuse. As for Gamma's payment, at worst, she could exchange the treasure necklace from before. With Salius's handwritten letter and the treasure, she did not believe that greedy divine physician would refuse to compromise. In order to save the princess with complete certainty, Kina had to take this step. Even though it was already late at night, she had to go find that man for help. Standing before Salius's door, Kina took a deep breath and knocked. Although she had no confidence at all, she had no way back now. However, after waiting for a long while, there was no movement inside the room. Just as Kina was hesitating over whether to leave, the tightly closed door was suddenly pulled open. Inside was nothing but deathly silent darkness. Before Kina could speak, a pained groan came from within the darkness. She followed the sound over and discovered Salius lying on the bed. His face was deathly pale, his entire body tormented by a nightmare. That pained voice was exactly the same as the one she had heard at the inn before. Kinna subconsciously wanted to reach out and comfort him, but halfway through, her hand froze in midair. The memory of touching his hair last time was still vivid. Besides, this man lying on the bed had personally poisoned her before. For her to sympathize with someone who wanted her life, her head must have been muddled. If Salius suddenly woke up and mistakenly thought she was trying to assassinate him, she definitely would not leave this room alive today. Just as Kinna was preparing to quietly slip away, the man on the bed suddenly moved in pain. Looking at Salius struggling in his nightmare, Kinna was briefly lost in thought. This tyrant, who usually seemed impervious to swords and spears, actually had such a fragile side in private. In the rumors of the world, Salius was a cold-blooded, ruthless monster who did not even blink when killing people. But Kinna clearly remembered that on that bloody night, when he had lifted her into his arms, his hands had carried a warmth that made people feel safe. Kinna shook her head self-mockingly, not understanding why she was thinking of these things. Back then, he had only saved her because he could not stand someone else's despicable methods. The wisest choice now was to leave this place quickly while he was still asleep. Yet she still turned back, looking at the man before her who was suffering so much. Kinna ultimately could not bear it. She gently reached out, wanting to smooth his tightly furrowed brow. In any case, she would leave this place sooner or later. Whether he lived or died should have had nothing to do with her. In Kinna's eyes, Salius had always been a dangerous monster. She avoided him as much as she could, fearing she would lose her life. But looking at his pained and helpless appearance at this moment, Kinna simply could not harden her heart and leave. This scene reminded her of those most desperate days in the underground prison of Albert. Looking at Salius, who was gradually calming down, Kinna could not help sighing. If only this man were usually this docile. But what one feared most always happened. Before Kinna could withdraw her hand, Salius unexpectedly opened his eyes without warning. The instant their eyes met, Kinna froze completely in place. She had been caught in the act touching someone's forehead in the middle of the night. Now, even jumping into the Yellow River would not wash her clean. Cold sweat poured down Kinna's back, and she thought this tyrant would kill her on the spot. But Salius merely looked at her coldly and spat out 2 words in a low voice. Continue. Seeing Kinna's blank expression, Salius directly grabbed her hand and pressed it against his forehead, ordering her in a low voice to continue what she had just been doing. This cold-blooded monster was actually actively seeking warmth. This night was finally endured, dangerous as it was. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the room, and Kinna woke up groggily on the bed. After all the fuss last night, she had thought she would be unable to sleep. She never expected that she would sleep so deeply. Kinna rubbed her aching shoulder and sat up, thinking that the maid Bestie would soon come in. But when she subconsciously turned her head, she was instantly struck as if by lightning. Salius was lying beside her, looking at her. Opening my eyes early in the morning, I found the Imperial Tyrant actually lying in my bed. In order to save the enemy kingdom's princess from certain death, I had no choice but to bow my head to this cold-blooded man. But was this antidote of unknown origin a life-saving miracle medicine or a deadly poison? Kinna was completely dumbfounded. This was her own private bedroom. How could Salius be sleeping here? Only then did she suddenly remember that last night, in order to soothe his nightmare, she had stroked his hair. In the end, she had fallen asleep while doing it. No wonder her shoulder hurt so badly now. Morning sunlight poured down, and Kinna's mind was a tangled mess. But now was not the time for wild thoughts. Salius coldly called her name. Kinna quickly gathered herself and responded, afraid that this killing god would fly into a rage on the spot. The man leaned against the headboard and questioned her coldly. Why did you come to me in the middle of the night? Only then did Kinna remember her true purpose from last night. She quickly lowered her head and explained, I came to discuss official business with your majesty. Last night, I accidentally fell asleep. I ask your majesty's forgiveness. After hearing her explanation, Salius merely replied indifferently, I understand. Do you know Gamma? Kinna calmly answered that previously, in order to expand tea production, she had indeed heard of him through her connections. This was far more than simply knowing him. That man was the one who had helped prepare her antidote. Their relationship was anything but ordinary. But this kind of secret absolutely could not be exposed in front of Salius. Fortunately, Salius did not grow suspicious. The man directly agreed. Fine, I will write him a letter now. Kina could hardly believe it. She cautiously asked in a soft voice, "Are you truly willing to write this letter?" Salius did not waste words and simply replied coldly, "I will leave this matter entirely to you." After saying that, the man picked up his pen and began writing. Looking at Salius's broad back, Kina could not help muttering inwardly. She had originally thought that once the peace talks collapsed, she would become an abandoned pawn. But now it seemed this man still had some other use for her. Salius's icy face, along with that line telling her to touch him, continued to linger in Kina's mind even now. This man usually looked so cold and forceful. Why had he suddenly become so abnormal last night? But at the moment, there was no time to think too much. A new day had already begun. Kina was sitting on the sofa with her eyes closed, resting her mind, when a series of urgent calls suddenly came from outside the door. Midorose called Kina's name while bringing one of the little creatures inside, saying that this little one had been making a fuss about wanting to see her. A smile immediately appeared on Kina's face, and she quickly welcomed them in. During the days while she waited for Gamma's reply, whenever Kina had free time, she would run over to keep Midorose company. Seeing Midorose depend on her so much, Kina felt indescribably happy. After all, from childhood until now, no one had ever favored her like this. Midorose raised her head and asked with a smile, "There must be many people who like you, right, Lady Kina?" Hearing this, Kina merely gave a bitter smile. "How could that be?" Kina was talking with Midorose when a servant suddenly rushed in to report that a letter had finally arrived from Gamma. This letter had come at exactly the right time. Kina immediately set off to get it. The contents of the letter were just as she had expected. Gamma had indeed prepared medicine that could save the princess. However, that greedy fellow also said that if the medicine was to work, he had to receive that legendary treasure. Since she had obtained the clue to the antidote, Kina did not delay for even a moment. She immediately set out to request an audience with the king of Tana. From behind the heavy wooden doors came the king's deep and dignified voice, permitting her to enter. As soon as they met, Kina stated her purpose directly, saying that she had come today because of Princess Midorose's illness. Hearing his daughter's name, the king's eyes clearly showed some surprise. Kina explained with a serious expression that she had already learned about the condition from the doctor, and that the Empire had a genius pharmacist. Although he had little fame outside, the medicine he prepared would absolutely be effective. Then Kina took out that bottle of antidote and said this was the medicine that could cure Princess Midorose. But after hearing this, the king beside her did not believe it at all. "Do you think I would believe you so easily? What if this is poison?" Facing this stern questioning, Kina did not panic in the slightest. "Your doubts are reasonable, but how could a country sincerely seeking peace poison the princess at a time like this? If the Empire truly wanted this country to perish, there would be no need to target the princess. If poison were to be used, it should be aimed at the prince with the right of succession." These words left the king speechless. The man sighed helplessly, saying that he had actually known for a long time that Kina and Midorose had grown close. He had even wanted to forcibly separate them several times. But whenever he saw Midorose showing such a happy smile in front of Kina, the king ultimately softened. After all, it had been a very long time since he had seen the princess smile. The king sighed and said that in the end, he still had not been able to harden his heart and forcibly separate them. Then the man looked at Kina and asked with some confusion, "For a girl you only met recently, you went to such great lengths to obtain medicine. Are you truly doing this only for the peace talks?" Hearing this question, Kina did not hide anything. She frankly admitted, "If I said I had no selfish motives related to the peace talks at all, that would certainly be a lie. After all, I did come here for peace between our two nations." But immediately after, Kina added, "But that is not the only reason." Kina confessed her true feelings. During the days she had spent with Princess Midorose, "I only want to do everything I could to protect her smile. And if possible, I also hope that someday in the future, there will be someone who loves me wholeheartedly in the same way." Hearing these sincere words, the king was completely persuaded. "Very well, I will accept this for now." Kina and Salius were preparing to leave. Judging from this, there should now be some hope for the peace talks. Just then, a clear call suddenly came from behind them. Kina subconsciously turned back to look. Who would have thought the one running over would actually be Midorose? Seeing her so full of energy, it was obvious that the antidote from before had worked. Kina asked with pleasant surprise, "Did you come specially to see me off? Is your body really all right? You actually ran so far." Midorose shook her head and said, "I'm fine. The maids are taking care of me. But more importantly," Midorose handed over the little one in her arms. "Lady Kina, I want to entrust this little one to you." This sudden gift surprised Kina somewhat. She asked hesitantly, "Entrust him to me? Have you really decided?" Midorose smiled and nodded. "Yes, he really seems to like you. With him by your side, you won't feel lonely in the future." Kina looked at Midorose and promised softly, "Princess Midorose, I will definitely take good care of him." After saying goodbye to the princess, Kina and the others arrived at the port of the Tana Kingdom, preparing to leave this place by ship. Standing on the deck, the little one in her arms seemed a little uneasy and let out a cry. Kina gently soothed him. "We're going to a new home. From now on, I'll definitely make sure you live happily." Kina was holding the little creature on the deck when she suddenly felt a chill behind her. She turned around, and sure enough, Salius was staring at her. This truly startled her. Although the peace talks had been temporarily set aside, and Salius did not intend to blame her, being stared at by this killing god the entire time made the atmosphere unbearably oppressive. Just then, during this awkward moment, the little one in her arms suddenly sneezed. Kina quickly shifted her attention and asked whether he was cold, even planning to have Bestie make him a little nest. Kina was walking around the deck with the little one in her arms when the ship suddenly jolted. She lost her footing and fell straight backward. If she hit the deck, she would definitely ache for days. Fortunately, someone behind her reacted quickly and caught her steadily in one motion. When Kina looked closely, she saw that the person who had saved her was actually Salius. She called out softly in embarrassment, "Your Majesty, I'm sorry." Just a moment ago, she had still been afraid of this man's gaze, but now that they were so close, she instead felt somewhat at a loss. Before Kina could react, Salius suddenly said in a low voice, "Do not leave my side." Salius suddenly made a move and directly dragged out a man who had secretly slipped onto the ship. This sudden disturbance startled Kina beside him as well. Looking at the man wearing a headscarf before him, Salius questioned coldly, "Who are you?" The man quickly waved his hands and explained that he had simply boarded the wrong ship, while also recognizing Salius's identity at once. Salius's entire body radiated terrifying killing intent as he coldly stared at the uninvited guest on the ground. From the look of it, he might attack at any moment. But the man on the ground was not flustered at all. Instead, he stood up with a grin. "Sorry for the late introduction. My name is Lu Shan. I'm just an ordinary treasure hunter." Hearing this name, Kina beside him froze at once. This man named Lu Shan, wasn't he the male lead of that best-selling novel? The Imperial Tyrant was about to strike a fatal blow, but the Queen risked her life to protect the strange man before her. Seeing the intimate interaction between the two, the Tyrant's possessiveness went out of control, and he completely overturned the jar of jealousy. Kina's mind was full of question marks. How had this man, who should have been active in the novel, suddenly ended up on this ship? Salius had no interest in what identity he had. He gave a cold snort and drew his longsword. "Since you are a treasure hunter, your career ends today." Judging from Salius's posture, he had clearly developed killing intent. Kina's heart jumped in alarm. He couldn't really be planning to deal with Lu Shan right here, could he? The maid Bestie hurried over and asked after Kina with concern. Kina handed the little black rabbit in her arms to Bestie and asked her to look after him for a while. Now things had become completely troublesome. If Salius really made a move, the following plan would be thrown into complete disorder. Even if the plot had deviated from the original, Lu Shan absolutely could not lose his life right at the beginning of the story. Salius did not care about any of that. He coldly spat out 2 words, "Goodbye." At this critical moment, Kina hurriedly shouted, "Wait!" Salius withdrew his longsword and questioned her in confusion. "As queen, you actually want to protect this man of unknown origin." Kina quickly explained, saying that this fellow was not an ordinary person. He was a treasure hunter who had discovered countless cultural relics. His Majesty should also have heard of his name. Hearing Lu Shan's name, Salius calmed down slightly. He did indeed have some impression of the name. In the rumors, there was such a strange fellow who liked searching for treasure but never accepted rewards. However, Salius then changed his tone. Even if he is famous, secretly sneaking onto the Emperor's ship is still a capital crime. In order to preserve Lu Shan's life, Kinna directly offered a tempting condition. As long as he spared this man, Lu Shan would definitely become a money tree for the Empire in the future. Salius glanced sideways at Lu Shan, who was shrinking off to the side, clearly not quite believing it. What great use could this fellow, who had secretly slipped onto the ship, possibly have? Kinna quickly struck while the iron was hot and proposed exchanging his life for a vow. From now on, whenever he found treasure, he would have to give a portion to the Empire. Moreover, he would have to sign a formal contract. Kinna's mental abacus was clattering loudly. Although the tea business was currently doing well, the Empire's financial crisis had not yet been fully resolved. In this world, ancient treasures were extremely valuable. Kinna actually was not completely confident either, but she was betting that Salius would definitely accept this proposal. After all, no one would go against money. Salius was not so easy to fool. How can we prove that this fellow is truly a capable treasure hunter? Still, Salius relented. In that case, we will test him on the spot. Kinna immediately expressed her agreement as well. Once they tested him, they would know whether he truly had ability. As a result, the test had only just begun when Lu Shan looked at the treasure before him and could not help crying out in surprise. Where exactly did you get this thing? Kinna did not hide it and directly said that it had been brought out from a cave in the southern part of the Empire. Hearing this, Lu Shan immediately grew anxious, saying that he had originally been targeting that cave as well, only to never expect that someone else would get there first. However, the fellow soon grinned and apologized, saying that he had actually already taken part at first. Kinna did not argue with him and smoothly had him explain all the clues he knew. Lu Shan was straightforward too and agreed at once. Holding the necklace, Lu Shan began talking nonstop. This was no ordinary jewelry. According to legend, it was an offering left at the king's tomb by an ancient queen after she lost her beloved husband. The teardrop-shaped jewel on it represented the queen's tears. Moreover, this type of gemstone had long since become extinct and could no longer be mined. The material alone was already priceless. Then Lu Shan took out a fox statue and introduced it with a smile, saying that it had been made based on the appearance of an ancient beast god. According to legend, at night, it would even come alive and sleep beside people. This fellow explained everything in such detail that he clearly did have some real ability. Lu Shan was still talking endlessly, even wanting to dig into the special symbols beneath the statue. Kinna listened from the side in a daze, never expecting this man to know so much. However, before Lu Shan could finish speaking, Salius coldly interrupted him. I can spare you this time, but if you dare violate the agreement, there will be only one road left for you, death. Then Salius ordered Kinna to prepare the contract. Kinna quickly agreed. It seemed this cooperation had been temporarily settled. Afterward, Kinna apologized somewhat embarrassedly, saying that she had made the decision on her own and forced him to hand over a portion of any treasure he found in the future. Lu Shan did not mind at all. He answered with a smile, "If that can save my little life, it's an amazing bargain. And being able to go to the castle often to deliver treasure doesn't sound bad either. Ordinary people don't get that chance." Seeing Lu Shan's optimistic appearance, Kinna could not help sighing inwardly. This fellow was unbelievably positive, exactly like the protagonist in the novel. Lu Shan asked curiously who had suggested excavating that southern cave. Kinna smiled and answered, "It was my idea." Hearing this answer, Lu Shan was completely stunned. He had never expected that it would actually have been the queen's decision. Kinna explained somewhat embarrassedly, "Just think of it as my intuition." When Lu Shan heard that, he became even more excited. Intuition? That's incredible. Then Lu Shan explained with some emotion that in order to find treasures, he had to bury himself in all kinds of ancient books every day, studying them and checking clues one by one. In the eyes of outsiders, he was a treasure hunter blessed with incredible luck. But in reality, all of it came from his tireless days and nights of forcing himself through books. That was why, from the bottom of his heart, he admired Kinna's talent for finding treasure by relying on intuition. Looking at the man before her, who was as docile as a little dog, Kinna suddenly realized something. No wonder Flora, the saintess in the novel, had eventually fallen hopelessly in love with him. This loyal dog personality was indeed hard to resist. But when the novel's plot was mentioned, Kinna thought of another person. That was Elian, who had always loved the Saintess deeply. Unfortunately, in the end, he could only be rejected. Kinna could not help starting to wonder, if Flora did not have the Saintess's halo, would Elian still be so deeply devoted to her? Lushan and Kinna were chatting happily, but no one noticed that Salius was standing above them, looking down coldly at everything. Watching Kinna chat so happily with another man, Salius felt rather displeased. This strong contrast made Salius's heart sink. In Salius's eyes, Kinna was always so perfect, dignified, and proper, like a flawless fortress. But in the blink of an eye, she had shown Lushan that utterly unguarded smile. This made Salius so jealous he could hardly bear it. Was it just because that fellow stood beside her? The more Salius thought about it, the angrier he became. He even began to regret his decision to spare Lushan. If he had known this would happen, he truly should have eliminated him outright. But seeing the way Kinna protected that fellow, he hesitated again. If he forced a move now, Kinna would probably never forgive him. Salius clicked his tongue irritably. Since when had he become so indecisive? It was truly laughable. He, the mighty imperial tyrant, had actually begun to care about another person's feelings. In the end, he still held back and walked alone toward the depths of the deck. Salius stood by himself on the deck, looking at the sea before him, but his mind was filled entirely with the scene from last night. At that time, Kinna's hand had gently stroked his hair just like that. Even now, he still could not forget that feeling. It was a warmth he had never experienced before, warm and gentle, even leaving him somewhat at a loss. But this warmth inexplicably gave rise to panic in his heart, as if some defensive line he had desperately guarded all this time was about to be completely shattered. Although he resisted it somewhat in his heart, he actually wanted to know where this warmth would ultimately lead him. From that moment on, his feelings toward Kinna had completely changed. Salius's thoughts had changed completely. In his eyes, Kinna was no longer some tool for peace talks. She was a woman he had to possess. Whether her tears or her smile, they could belong to him alone. The scene shifted, and the ship had already docked. Lushan was saying goodbye to Kinna. If I find any good treasures in the future, I'll definitely bring them to the castle for you. We'll meet again. Kinna also advised him with some concern. When you're adventuring outside, you absolutely must not take unnecessary risks. Lushan was not shy at all. He directly extended his hand with a smile and said, "Then please take care of me from now on." Kinna did not put on airs either and responded to him with a smile. But in the eyes of the person beside them, this scene had taken on a completely different meaning. Salius watched coldly from the side, feeling unbearably displeased. A commoner actually dared to take the initiative to shake hands with the queen. Wasn't his courage a little too great? Salius, who usually cared about nothing, could not suppress the anger in his heart at this moment, because in his eyes, Kinna was already his woman. Since she was his possession, he absolutely would not allow anyone else to covet her. Seeing Lushan's hand about to touch Kinna, Salius suddenly moved in a flash, forcibly cutting off the contact between the two. Salius directly stood between them and coldly warned Lushan, "Do not touch her."